Well, good evening. Welcome to this, what is actually the first full meeting of I should get the title right in a minute, the Community Environment and Partnerships Committee. The usual things, fire evacuation procedures. We're not expecting a fire alarm test. So if the fire alarm does go, it's probably the real thing, and there are exits at this end and that end, and meet outside in War Memorial Park so we can check everybody's got out safely. The meeting is being webcast, and please can everyone who hasn't already done so turn their mobile phones off or to silent. I'm not aware of any apologies for absence or substitution, so that's all the regular members of the committee here. This is clearly at least for tonight, a popular committee. Lots of people want to speak, so I'm going to use Chair's prerogative and reorder the agenda. I'm going to start with transport because that's supposed, as it says on the back of our agenda, to be a simple factual report covering the work of the commissioning outcome group. So that should be a nice simple item. We don't want to duplicate what scrutiny are doing. We want to just do what we're supposed to do. So I'm going to do that first in the hope that we will do that swiftly and move on. I'm then going to do the cemetery, which is clearly the issue most people want to talk about second. And we will need to devote quite a lot of time for that. And then at the point at which I fixed the order, the only other item in which I had someone down to speak was trees, so that will come third, but now we've got someone down to speak as well on parks and open spaces, but that will be fourth. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest?
Only in item, whatever it is now. The one you just moved. Parks and open spaces. Yeah, parks and open spaces, as a resident of Sinclair Drive. That's all.
Okay. But you're still able to participate. Okay. I have two declarations. Firstly, I have what's known as a special interest in relation to the parks and open spaces because I was present at the cabinet meeting that approved the recommendation to full council, which has been referred back to this committee. So I shall be leaving when we get to that item. My vice chair will take over the chair, but I shall be hanging around outside to come back in for the discussion of the work programme. Also, just for the avoidance of doubt, so everybody's quite clear, the proposed site for the cemetery is in my ward. Places that have been proposed as alternatives are also in my ward. I don't have a pecuniary interest. I don't have a stated public position on the issue. Any views on behalf of my residents will be put forward by one of my fellow councillors, and I don't even know exactly what he's going to say. He's only given me a very brief heads up at the start, so I shall be chairing that one because I don't have an interest that precludes me from taking part in it. I don't have any urgent matters. Minutes of the committee are paper A, minutes of the last committee meeting. You're okay if I
have a small thing.
Oh, yeah. Councillor.
Chair, I initially thought there was a mistake in the minutes. That is not so because I checked with the webcast and the webcast is well reflected here. But you might recall when we were putting up these panels together, because I'd expressed an interest in it, the one that's just changed its name, I'm just trying to find it, but the one that deals with maintenance, what it was, something the estate it was called before, was the one that I'd particularly wished to target, but didn't finish up being appointed to because I led the discussion in another direction. We never got back to it. So I should like to be included in that, subject to general agreement, and because I can't do them all, I would then withdraw from the playing fields one.
Thank you. When we get to the work programme, we'll discuss whether the scoping group, if that's what it was called, have any ongoing function, but we'll certainly, if they do, we'll make that change. Okay, subject to that, well, that doesn't affect the minutes either, so people are happy that at the end I'll sign the minutes in due course. Thank you. Right, transport. As I said, what we wanted to do was just get a brief update on what the COG is up to, so that we could consider as a committee whether we should do anything between now and January when it's due to have produced its proposals. We will certainly have a full debate of the proposals in January. But the issue we wanted to address on the background that a lot of us are not totally up to speed on COGs, as they're rather new, is what the COG is up to and whether we wanted to have any input into it. So that's the question I'll be asking when we've had the presentation. Are we content to leave our input till January? If the answer is no, I'm not sure what the process is for doing anything different between now and January, but let's have the presentation and ask the question, and then we'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, councillors. Transport update. This report is an update on the work that is in progress at the present moment. Hampshire County Council has to save 1.25 and 1.5 million from their supported passenger service budget. I, at the moment, have written a letter accompanying the BDBC consultation response for this review on the local bus and community transport services, and you will have seen that on the appendices that you had with the report that came out for committee. Officers are working on the worst case scenario, exploring what BDBC can do to minimise the impact of potential reductions so we are as prepared as possible. And can I also say, as you might expect, that officers at Hampshire County Council are also preparing for a worst case scenario and are preparing tender documents to ensure that any changes can be implemented from the beginning of January 2015. A lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is done through partnership. We have quarterly partnership meetings chaired by myself. The last meeting was in June and our next one is next week. They have been attended by Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council officers, Hampshire County Council, Stagecoach and other organisations when relevant. We have done much with Basingstoke and North Hampshire to overcome their traffic problems with the buses whilst they were building the new patient unit. We've been also successful in resolving issues with buses and borough surveys. Anything that came out of the borough that we can help, then we have used our partnership. In future, and we will be discussing this next week, in future meetings will be open to other councillors via the members' bulletin as appropriate. And also we will take requests from visiting councillors' attendance direct to myself. So we are looking at a way-in that the ward councillors and representing their constituents can have a way into our meetings. Stagecoach service enhancements to their commercial routes made on the 31st of August 2014. And these, you will be pleased to know, are updates were as a result of the feedback from residents and councillors at scrutiny on the 30th of June. We looked at outline detailed, which were emailed to all councillors on the 11th of August, full details of the changes in the members' bulletin on August 15th, and three of the others that are coming out of this is we're introducing low floor buses in Basingstoke this autumn, 2 years earlier than planned. I should say Stagecoach are doing that. Committed to carrying out a consultation of commercial services in the autumn once we know what Hampshire County Council reductions will be. And future network changes will be discussed as promised by Stagecoach with officers, the portfolio holder and relevant councillors. Officers were given sight of a draft document outlining the unconfirmed services changes on July the 30th. These did not get approved by Stagecoach until the 11th of August, and the next members' bulletin, there was an input on the 15th of August. So all communication we have passed to the ward councillors. Evening service pilot. Regular promotion scheduled into the 2015 included officers working in partnership with Stagecoach, press release in July, advertising through parish and community magazines. We have a plasma screen in the malls, leaflets and flyers to community hotspots, use of social media and on website. We also have an article in the autumn edition of Basingstoke and Day to Day. And I missed a slide. I do apologise, but as you can see, the evening service pilot, we are gaining in numbers. The last 2 weeks, 5 and 6, will not be available until the end of this week. Officers are monitoring progress and will increase promotion as appropriate. So you can see the nighttime service is proving to be beneficial. Commissioning, COG. access has been defined as the opportunity to access affordable public transport when needed. COG 3 focuses on how to facilitate integration between providers to give the best opportunities for seamless journeys that anyone can make to the places where they want to go at times when they need to and at a price they can afford to pay. The Council's approach to commission actually is to deliver quality services for our community and customers designed around present and future needs in the most efficient and appropriate way. The Council at the moment is implementing our commissioning programme over the next 4 years through the creation of commissioning outcome groups, and the programme started with the arts in February 2014. To date, we are on, and actually it occurred today, session 3. The next session will be on the 15th of October. We will review the options and ideas that were identified at today's session. Supplementary session, if we require it, following Hampshire County Council's review outcomes, we will have added meetings then. Service design sessions will be in mid-November, and a report then to CEP in the spring of 2015. Currently at this stage we would undertaking this morning a gap analysis and idea modelling where gaps in provision are established and agreed, the options for solutions identified, and the next session will be looking at refining these options. And any councillor from this committee is still welcome to attend any future sessions, and the next one, as I said, will be on the 15th of October. Here, I hope you can see it, but if anybody wanted copies of the slides, if you please let Peter Smith know, we'll be only too happy to give you a copy. But basically, the COG 3 on public transport, we've been looking at outcomes for people and outcomes for the place. And outcome for the place was undertaken this morning. And we were generating this morning on how we could best meet these outcomes in session 3. In conclusion, can I just reiterate that Stagecoach is a commercial company and has no obligation to work with the councillor and partners, but is currently happy to do so. Approximately 80% of Stagecoach services in Basingstoke are run commercially without any council subsidy. Basingstoke and Deane have no control over commercial services, but has been able to influence via the partnership that has been built. Effective promotion of bus services is more important than ever. Modern technology and social media have opened up more communication channels. By working together, the public and private sector can make the biggest difference for those who are reliant on public transport. And we will continue to communicate all future work to members. And the process, as I said, as to how ward councillors can become involved with our quarterly meetings will be discussed next week. And my final message to you is that if you want a vibrant economy in Basingstoke and Deane, we need to ensure that we have an excellent public transport system. It's something that is very true or near to my heart. And I have spoken to Maria Miller, our MP. She has a copy of the report that the committee members have had, and I have asked that we are pleased to ask the Secretary, the Ministry of State for Transport, to visit. So I've asked for a meeting with the Transport Minister. So I await a report on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I should have introduced Councillor Mrs. Ottleton, who's the Cabinet Member for Partnerships. We also have with us officers Peter Smith and Amy Richards, but I think you are just here to help the questions, not planning to. Right, we have one visiting councillor who wishes to speak on this, which is Councillor Regan. Regan, sorry. I shall be using the 4-minute timer thingy, so please try and keep reasonably within. You are ready to go now.
I've come to the praise season, not berry season. No, I also firstly start off with saying thanks to Councillor Austin, who's actually done a good job in under different circumstances on public transport. And I expect her commitment to it, actually. I mean, the constraints we have upon the Borough Council, quite rightly, we have no influence over the commercial companies such as Stagecoach or whoever, because we are not the traffic authority, and we are not the and also you've got the 1985 Transport Act, which really governs all, actually. Deregulation, another piece of wonderful factual right legislation, but we'll go into that later. But in terms, all the things that happened since the 30th of June have been good. I mean, it increased the number 3, the half-hourly service in the evening, then the pilot on the Friday, the youth fairs that have been talked about. All these are excellent things, actually. But everything hangs on the county council's review, what comes out of that, and how that feeds in to the promised Stagecoach review routes. I mean, I will speak about my own ward. My own ward, yet again, still hasn't got a proper bus service because it was cut unreasonably and without consultation on the 16th of February this year. So my constituents were like that reviewed as much as everybody was probably in Oakley and elsewhere, actually. So I welcome this paper, actually, and thanks to Cash. Also, I hope I've not ruined your career. But I do appreciate the hard work you're doing in the Conservative Cabinet and under the current legislation, actually, as well. So the key to all this is a review of the commercial services in this autumn to make sure that Stagecoach actually do that, actually. And by having a review, I mean an improvement and review the routes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Osselton.
Yes, could I just say, Councillor Eden, thank you, because I also say thank you to the officers, Lisa Kirkman, Peter Smith and Amy Richards. They're working tirelessly on the buses. Everywhere you go, we're talking about the buses.
I concur with that, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one very quick question. Councillor Osselton, when you were speaking, you said we would get a report of this committee in the spring. At the moment, I think we have it timetable for the 21st of January because we thought the COG was due to report in December. Has the timetable slipped? Because we'd like to move it, we might as well have it in the right committee meeting at this stage.
Is that because it's to do with Hampshire County Council?
Yeah, I'll take that one for you, Chair. I checked with the commissioning team colleagues today, and we're waiting, as Councillor Regan said, on the outcome of the HDC review. Depending on how much the impact of those reductions are, we may need to rerun sessions C and D to make sure that we are fully reviewing and the ideas that are coming forward to the committee pick up those additional gaps. So it could be rephased, but we'll keep you up to date.
So just to summarise, at the moment, we'll keep it January because it might be January. We'll slip it when we know it needs to slip. Okay, thank you very much. So, committee, the bit on the COG is on pages 36 and 37 of 78 in the agenda. Last week's scrutiny had a long session on the way the COG process is working, on which I was present as a substitute. I think the point that came out very clearly there was that the COG process is a very timetable process. So to make sure it gets through, there are these series of sessions A, B, C, D, each of which has a particular purpose that's set in advance. I welcome personally the commitment from the Cabinet member that any councillor who wants to go along to this COG can go along to it. Personally, I think that the objectives of the COG and the scope of the COG are very broad, and they seem to cover everything that I would have thought we might be interested in. And to move things along, I would propose that we're grateful for this report, that if any of us takes the opportunity of going along to the COG and feels there's an issue that this committee should take an interest in sooner rather than later, that they bring it back to this committee. I'm sure I can find a way of getting it on agenda if you raise it with me. But that otherwise, we don't need to do anything at this stage as a whole committee, but look forward eagerly to the report in the new year. So that's my proposal, but it is a point for debate. I should have done questions separately, but please do questions and debate together on this item if you want to. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't sure whether you were zooming ahead without the debate, so that's why I quickly threw my hand in the air. If I can just go through it rather than just the COG, if I can go back a couple of steps in the report and then come to the COG as it goes forward. The first was just, I'd like to follow in Councillor Regan's footsteps and say, I think you've done a stunning job. I have to say, you've achieved more than any of your predecessors in getting some dialogue going with Stagecoach, and you've achieved a lot more than I ever thought you would. That said, I think there's an enormous mountain to climb, and one of the mountains is the very word stagecoach. Now, I note through this report there's no reference to any other operators, which it strikes me haven't been considered, and I would like a view on that. It might be deemed a lost cause in commercial terms, but I think that there are other bus operators and they should be considered. There's reference here to improvements and provision of extra bus lanes. That pops up a couple of times. I was at a meeting with Councillor Miller and you, Chair, yesterday where there was reference to removal of a bus lane. So that seemed to be going in the wrong direction, although it's said that it's with the tentative support of Stagecoach. But nonetheless, it sort of puts a little bit of concern in my thinking. Moving on then to page 36, where you mention real-time information, and there's a list elsewhere of where this is being introduced. I was a little surprised that the Chinham Shopping Centre wasn't included. And I don't say this totally parochially, but that is, apart from the bus station in the town centre, that must be about the biggest local bus service interchange in the borough. It gets a lot of buses going in there at very haphazard times, and it would be rather nice, and I think appropriate, if there were a real-time information system there. And talking about older technology, tomorrow morning, probably with others, I'll be attending a South West Trains forum information session. And every time I've gone to these, and I've gone quite often, as Mr. Smith knows, I raise the issue of the fact that the railway station doesn't even have bus timetables, and they're the same company. And it does seem to me a very simple move for, if we're trying to get this information across, which is in this report, to have that integration and exchange of information. And if you can achieve that, you're a better person than just about any of us, I think, because I've been trying as long as I can. And I think there's last one you'll be pleased to hear, Chair. I can't resist mentioning the cycle routes improved. I'm delighted to see it in here. I'm not quite sure how it crept in, but I am delighted to see it. I hope it happens because, again, as others will know in this room, I don't see us going in the right direction for that. But since it's part of public transport, which you are promoting marvellously in this report and the COG, it really needs to be integrated with bus services. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, I think it's, the question was, do I want the portfolio to comment? I think those were valid points that I think will all be taken. I don't think any of us would want to disagree with those points. But please, I don't want a list of all the useful places you might have real-time information around the borough, because I'm sure we'd all like them in our own wards. But anyone else want any questions or comments, or were you happy with my summary of the way we should approach the COG? Okay, so I think for the minutes, it's a case of we were content with what I said about the COG. Individual members can go along if things occur at the COG that they want to draw attention to the whole of this committee before the final report. They can tell me, and I'll find a way of getting on an agenda. Other than that, we'll look forward to the report of the proposals that come out of the COG when it's available, January or a bit later. And I think from the point of the minutes, can we say that the Council Agreement raised a number of points of detail that the portfolio holder will take away without itemising them? Is that all right? Thank you very much. Cemeteries. Slight changeover in the people sitting at the table.
I didn't mention Jim there because...
No, it's, you Okay, now we've been joined at the table by Councillor Ms Eachus, who's the Cabinet Member for Community Services and the Environment, in whose portfolio all the remaining topics for this evening seem to fall, and by Tim Bosky, who's the officer who's going to introduce us to the paper on cemeteries. Oh, sorry, the portfolio is going to do it. So before that, can I just check? After that, we'll have the public speaking. I've been given the names of two members of the public from one firm of funeral directors. Are you planning to speak separately or jointly? Can you? Jointly, okay. And so the normal rule is that members of the public get 2 minutes and councillors get 4 minutes, which is slightly unfair. So as there's two of you, and as I'm quite sure the other public speaker will struggle to stick to 2 minutes, I will let you have 4 minutes as well. But please don't go beyond the 4, else I shall be in serious trouble. Okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks the view of this committee on a proposal to submit outline planning application for cemetery use on the North Waltham site. Just by way of background, the borough only has 5.5 years worth left of capacity at Worthing Road Cemetery, so we needed to find another site, and the Cabinet previously agreed feasibility work to identify possible sites, and this council made a public commitment to finding a cemetery site. The North Waltham site was previously identified after other sites were looked at and scored on a matrix, and it was selected by committee. The public's views were sought in a consultation in 2013, and details of that consultation are set out in the report. The council has already met with local funeral directors, monumental masons, and had discussions with Dignity, who run the crematorium. I fully appreciate that one of the main concerns of this site is the lack of public transport. This initially will primarily affect residents living in the town areas, as village cemeteries at present still have capacity. Excuse me. We are, as a council, and the Cabinet does make the commitment to look at ways to support residents with travel to the site. The council is investigating options to assist residents that would find travelling to the North Waltham site difficult. We do have time to do this. We have another 5 years, but we will be looking at this ASAP, and we will be working with and speaking to companies such as Dial-A-Ride and Neighbour Care, and looking at a type of subsidised taxi share scheme. The North Waltham site does have some longevity. It has 90 years capacity. We won't initially need all of it, so we will be looking to rent back some of the site to the local farmers, creating the council an income. The site does allow for woodland burials and natural burials if that's what's required, and therefore we're looking at option 1B, and it's to seek your comments on that. That's the same as option 1, to seek to provide a cemetery on the North Waltham site by submitting the outline planning application, but with a commitment to look at the provision of a revenue allowance to support a taxi share or car share scheme or some other type of community transport.
Thank you. Just, it would be helpful, committee, if just before people speak, just we look at page 14 of 78 and the recommendation that's before us. Our views are sought on the proposed submission of an outline planning application for cemetery use, and in the event of a planning application being successful, the release of some money, and in the event of it being unsuccessful, to continue work on an alternative suitable site elsewhere. And as it says over the page, the views of the committee will be reported to Cabinet at the end of this month, seeking a approval for a way forward. So, speakers, if Jonathan and Elizabeth Harris would come forward to these chairs at the front here, please. And you have 4 minutes to say what you...
As funeral directors, we're worried about the impact on the general public, not on us. We believe the site is far too far from the town. The report says it's only 3.5 miles from the south of the town, but what happens if you live in Chinham and Popley? And also, they don't have their own cemeteries out that way, so you've got to consider those people. We were promised a bus route for the crematorium. We didn't get it. I know you're suggesting the car and taxi share scheme, but cemeteries are visited on a really regular basis. Some of our clients go daily, and I just don't see how that's going to work. I would suggest that you actually looked a bit further into how people use cemeteries like that. The public transport is available at the other sites or within easy walking distance or a slight deviation from an existing bus route. The proposal says that we don't get a cemetery chapel until phase 3. So what are we meant to use in the meantime? We could use the crematorium chapel, but that's £385 as compared to £67 if you use Basingstoke. If you're asking us to use churches and village halls around Basingstoke rather than up at the cemetery, you're going to have corteges of cars going through with could be up to 100 people plus going through the town
And
following the hearse.
there was a comment made that all the villages around the town are okay, got the capacity, but I know Worting has not got that. Worting Church, there's no capacity left.
And lots of them actually don't have cemeteries and churchyards. You've got to remember that. We suggest it's just too far out of town for the general public. We would make 2 suggestions. Firstly, we understand that the figures that you worked out from the cemetery capacity, saying 5.5 years, is actually using the policy that you've got now of selling pre-purchased graves. If you stopped that, because it would be easy to stop that, you are going to extend the life of the cemetery until the Many Down site would be available. Our second suggestion would be, instead of spending £450,000 on a plot of land that you don't own, that you use land in the short run that's owned by the council, such as the Kempshot site, which would maybe give you 20 plus years, and that would see you through until the Many Down site was ready. Either option, in our opinion, would give the public a cemetery within the town's perimeter with easy access by car or public transport and would save money. John?
I think you've covered most of it, really.
We're not worried about us because it doesn't matter to us, but in our professional opinion, it is too far out for people to be able to visit comfortably
And obviously,
and safely.
from Popley, it's like roughly a 10-mile trip. So that's a 20-mile round trip for people to go to the crematorium. And elderly people have probably got to rely on their children to take them. Great. Unfortunately, the place where it is at the moment is a fantastic place, and unfortunately, we can't use the last bit that was left there.
That it would just be great to have somewhere actually in the town for the public.
That's what we're worried about, is the elderly people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you could just hang on there 1 minute, I just wanted to check your suggestions, which was that was you commented that our figures of the capacity remaining at Worthing Road were based on our present practice of pre-selling plots.
I believe it is, yeah.
I presume implicit in that was a belief that if we change the practice, it might last
It will
longer.
last
Okay.
longer. It
I will
will
ask
last
the
longer.
officer specifically to comment on
Okay.
that when we've had all the speakers.
So there's nothing stopping anyone sort of
No.
buying 10 plots if they're that worried and they want to go in Worthing Road in the future.
And your preference for using on a shorter term basis land owned by the council was the site at Kempshot.
It's not
which-
a preference. I'm just
Oh.
saying that if there is land owned
Okay.
by the council in the town centre that we could use in a short period, it would be so much better
until
for
there
the
was time
public.
for additional money. Okay, again, I will ask the officer to comment on that when
Okay.
we've had all the speakers. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Julian Jones, Chair of Dummer Parish Council, please. So can I just check with the officers, the camera is still just showing the general room, but last time that happened, that was because we're in the process of changing the system and it's not yet tuned into focusing on individual speakers. So I'm afraid if you try and watch yourself on the webcast when it's when you get home or when it's published, you won't see close-ups of yourself. We're just getting a general view of the room. Okay. So shorter speeches tonight, guys. Right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to address the committee this evening. The Parish Council has a direct interest in this development since the funeral corteges pass along the A30, which either runs through the parish or is its boundary. In addition, the wakes take place in the Queen Inn at Dummer Golf Club, which is good for vitality, but brings, as was pointed out earlier, a lot of traffic into the village. This proposal, though it's not a planning application at this stage, should have regard for the policies in the NPPF that focus on sustainability and the need to minimise journey length. This site's the furthest from the town and on a route that's frequently congested today and likely to be gridlocked if all the sites included in the current local plan are developed. This route has several excellent black spots, including the southward traffic lights, and in the unrestricted section of the A30, the junction with Popham Lane at the Wheatsheaf and the intersection of the A30 and the A33. These are in addition to the accidents on the A303 slip road and the access to the crematorium itself, which are documented in the consultation comments. Finally, the lack of transport that's been addressed already, the existing bus service, the 55, which only runs on school days, and the 55A that runs 3 days a week, going into Basingstoke at 10 o'clock and returning at 1:30. Those services, if they were used, are not allowed to use the bus station, so transfers to other buses is difficult, and Stagecoach's robust competitive posture doesn't permit any display of timetable information on any other bus stops, and so that makes it almost impossible to know when buses are running from the demographic we're looking at. Unfortunately, our experience with the Begwood bus service, when funding was provided, was that it ran out, and 15,000 for a shared taxi service is unlikely to provide a long-term solution. An allocation of a year's funding is just not sufficient for a sustainable service. The concept of a shareable taxi service for either one-off journeys to a funeral or for visits to the graves is unlikely to be satisfactory for mourners or for the bereaved. Again, addressing the temporary needs, a site in the Woodland Park in the to the northeast of Wood and St Lawrence should be considered as a temporary measure and would be very suitable for natural burial ground.
Thank you very much. Councillor Keating.
Thank you. I know this paper has been at other committees, but I've reserved my right to speak at what I think is the last one. However, I'm often wrong about the last one. My own view is very simple. I'm a member of the Manydown Overview Committee, and I've been on committees dealing with the issues of Manydown for many years. In 2011, when the first proposal was developed to put a new cemetery out of town, the Manydown land was not necessarily available. Since 2011, the availability of Manydown land for development has been both changed. It is now available, and it is now being planned so that the Manydown land is now available. It seems to me that anybody who wants to buy 15 acres of land for a cemetery when we own 800 acres of land next to the town centre, it's absolutely crazy. You waste money to buy 15 acres of land 10-15 miles out of town, and we own 800 acres down the side of Roman Road. It's crazy. Secondly, because we got it wrong and put the crematorium way out there with no transport, and we failed to ensure that transport was there, it's also crazy to now talk about forgetting about the 800 acres we've got. Let's pay more money every year to have shared taxis. That's a nonsense. It's a nonsense. Now, where would you put it on Manydown? The answer is we own the land. We can put it anywhere we want on Manydown. Right? We own the land, therefore we're planning to put houses on Manydown, which is great. And we should. But we should also say, there we're going to have a cemetery. Now, I put some thought into where it ought to go. Because I know, being on the Manydown Overview Committee, that we are going to have 3 urban centres, village centres, one of which it will be the largest, and which will be on the junction along Worthing Road, past Worthing Village, where the farm shop now is. That's where the urban centre will be centralised. Now, if you're going to have an urban centre and lots of houses around there, it is the one place where we are very, very likely to be successful in getting serviced by buses. We won't have to invent buses. We won't have to pay anyone else to provide the buses. It'll be a commercial arrangement, and it'll work because the numbers will be there. Therefore, no buying land, no subsidised transport. Find a spot nearest to the largest urban centre in the 800 acres of land that we're going to build on. The first part of the Manydown development is up until 2029. So we will have to put it in the first half of the development, because by 2020 we'll have run out of land in Worthing Road. So my suggestion is, you've all got this, by the way, Appendix C, it's in your papers. There's the urban centre, based on the current plans, which are not going to change materially. We put a cemetery within walking distance of that urban centre, and we have a solution.
Thank you very much.
15 acres out of 800, we can actually live with that.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes. Can I just say, it's probably obvious, but for the officer, I would like some feedback on each. We've had 2 or 3 suggestions of possible locations now. Julian Jones suggested the woodland up by Wootton St Lawrence. That was a suggestion. It's very clear where that is, somewhere near near the top of the hill, on the little hill on the B3400, which is where the proposed district centre is. So I'm very familiar with where Councillor Keating's talking about. So, and then the site in Kempshot was mentioned earlier. So we'd like some, a brief analysis of your responses on all of those when everybody's spoken. Thank you. Councillor Reagan again, please. Regan, sorry, I'll get used to it.
It was always ringing up until Ronald come along. I blame him. Then we got Clinton afterwards, all right. So I'm not going to talk about the, unsurprisingly, about which piece of land use. I just want to point out about why, if you go to North Waltham, you need a bus service. You cannot have a shared taxi service, because the current service at the moment, as we heard, is inadequate, and it doesn't run on a Sunday. What are we doing? Cemeteries are a public service, and so are crematoriums. And if you lay people to rest, you must put on a public service to get there. If you can't go and pay respects on a Sunday to your loved ones, what are we doing? So I'd say, if you're going to go for North Waltham, you would have to have a subsidised bus service similar to the shuttle bus service we've got at the moment. I wouldn't say it run every 10 minutes, it could run every 90 minutes, every hour. That would have to be that, so people would know it'd go from the town centre to the actual cemetery. That's what it'd have to be. The shared bus service, a shared taxi service would not work. It would not be reliable, and it'd end up falling to the side. And also, £15,000, it was a joke. I mean, it needs a lot more than that. You've got to think about proper investment in public service, and it have to be a subsidised service, because Stagecoach won't run a service there, or any other private company. It's got to be make a profit. So I say you'd have to look seriously at running a shuttle bus service there on a realistic timetable, but it'd have to run on a Sunday. This brought home to me. I was at the cemetery on Sunday with my wife, and she was paying respect to her parents. I mean, the place was packed. The place was full of people. Are we going to deny that to people who go out to North Waltham? Because unless you have a subsidised bus service, that won't happen. So I asked the committee to think about it seriously.
Thank you very much. So that's at least 2 public transport bus service points for the officers to pick up. One is whether the money would run out after a year or 2, as has happened with other services, and whether it would be viable to have a bus service rather than a taxi share, particularly the point about taxi share not running on a Sunday. I think we'd like a response to that. So Mrs. Frankham.
I'd like to obviously say that what Councillor Keating said makes sense, and I hope that you really are open to looking at possibly other sites. I'm hoping that our cemeteries officer, Keith Davis there, who I've had, unfortunately in one way, to have to deal with the loss of my husband, and I saw him again this week because I've bought my family plots because I, like a lot of other people, I live in Basingstoke, I serve in Basingstoke, my children will not have other children, so we only have each other, and in death we want to be together. I do not want to have two plots in Basingstoke and one in North Waltham. So I think a lot of people are in the same situation as myself. Also, perhaps the officer can explain about the 75-year lease, as was explained to me, because obviously I was, like a lot of people, I was really concerned. So it's not 5.5. I don't intend to pop off quite yet. I think I've got a few more years, and even longer for my two children. Also, again, on the transport, it's all very well saying share taxis. Share taxis, it still cost about £40 to £50 for a journey out to North Waltham and back. So even if you're sharing it, even if you halve that, but if you've got your bus pass, it costs you nothing. And your bus pass, you're more likely to have lost somebody because you're older or you're disabled. I myself go to visit my husband's grave on a fairly regular basis, but I've seen people and talked to people that go there almost on a daily basis. Can you imagine how much that would cost? Or if they can't, especially at the beginning, until you start coming to terms that you've lost your nearest and dearest. I just wondered if the other sites, I remember looking at the crematorium in Basing Woods / Carpenter's Down in 1996. Was that revisited? I've heard about Kempshot. I just don't like the idea that we're looking at one site, that's it. It's almost like, what's the point in consulting if you're not actually opening your mind to alternative sites? And the other problem I foresee, if you have the site, are you going to have a lodge on the site where you're going to have staff there during the day when it's needed? Because if you're out in the sticks, you still have the possibility of vandalism. And what is going to happen to our staff, who are absolutely excellent? And I'll leave it at that. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think there's probably now a couple of questions around facilities on the site, when they'd be available, what they'd be, that we'd like the officer to cover. Councillor Pearce here? No. Then it's Councillor Harvey.
No, apologies for Councillor Pearce, who's unwell at the moment. I wanted to start really by just asking members to think about the sort of feedback that you've seen from residents, and I know we've had from residents in particular, on this very issue, because it has been debated, and it is being debated out there in Basingstoke. And one of the issues that's consistently being raised, that you've already heard from, is access. It's also, the words that have been used, is isolation and remoteness. They consistently come up in terms of people's views of the site under consideration. I also know that that's one of people's main concerns about the existing crematorium. that they consider that to be remote and they consider that to be isolated, as people trying to access and use the facility for the memory and commemoration of their loved ones. I think the villages in the main have got their own provision. Not all have, but many have. So what we're really discussing here tonight is a cemetery mainly for the town and the whole town. I think North Waltham is the only site where the council would have to fork out nearly £500,000, which is at odds, as others have said, when we already own quite a significant amount of other land around the town. So it seems this decision, I think, has been overtaken by events, and it's been overtaken by more appropriate sites in the past couple of years. Now, couldn't that £500,000 be better spent elsewhere? Couldn't that £500,000, for example, better subsidise a bus service actually accessing a chosen site? Or, whichever site is chosen, accessing the site in the way the residents would expect, and that's not a taxi share. It's also the only site the council would have to then annually spend money subsidising a bus route if you do go with North Waltham, because the taxi share won't work. So an annual bus route is going to cost this borough significantly ongoing costs. And we all know what happens to subsidised bus routes and the debate you had before this one. A taxi share on paper sounds reasonable, but in practice it won't do the job set against the demand that's needed and likely in this context. Now look, if the administration are committed to North Waltham, if this is the direction of travel that you're going in, and I think it's the wrong one, at the very least you should be seeking, I think, to extend the option to purchase the land by another 6 months. That would then give you time to relook at the options. A planning process, most likely at the shortest, would take 6 months. At the outset, if there's problems and issues, would take 18 months from when it's verified and from when it's submitted. And that's a question. You know, when would you look to submit and when would you seek to go through the process on this? So there is time to get this right if it is done properly. But things have changed in 2 years since all the options were discussed last. The local plan's been produced in draft. Sites have come forward and arisen. New opportunities have come forward and arisen. And the issue over Manydown has finally been resolved. We know the direction of travel there on Manydown, and it is an option. So too a possible temporary option of an extension of the children's cemetery near the hospital, if you're looking for a temporary solution. Now, both of those are on bus routes. Both of those are on bus routes that are frequently used and are well used by residents, particularly if you think about the Wellington Terrace end of Winkleberry, and particularly if you think about the hospital. So there are options. There is a way to navigate through this so that we take people with us. But I think the one thing that's coming across loud and clear is that the North Waltham option is the least favoured of everybody you've heard so far this evening, including the professionals, let alone us councillors. It is the least favoured of everybody that we've spoken to about this, and that is a considerable number of residents. And the issue is, this is for the town. So if you stick it at North Waltham, you are genuinely doing the rest of the town a disservice. I genuinely think there are better options. We've got time to think this through. So let's do the right thing and not rush ahead with North Waltham, but look at those other options in a bit more detail.
Thank you very much, and well stuck to time. Can I just, we won't start now, but Officer, again, if you could, a couple of speakers have now said that the previous options were reviewed in 2011. A lot of things changed since 2011. The paper says the committee discussion was September 2012. So if you could perhaps address the point as to how out of date or not out of date the previous analysis was when you respond to all this, that would help me. We're getting near the end. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair, Committee. I'm basically here to express some concerns from some of my residents. I was actually at a meeting of the Parish Council last night in North Waltham, and this came up, and I was asked to come and represent some views. The first one is that it's believed that there is actually a riverbed that runs through the site, and then it flows on from North Waltham, around North Waltham. One or two of the members last night actually knew the site of the riverbed, and on through to Dean, which were obviously, as everyone is aware, was flooded quite considerably for a number of months earlier this year. And obviously that then raises a very large concern whether some of the liquids of decomposition could possibly be leaching out into the water table. And whilst I know that the report that's in front of you does actually state that the EA isn't aware of any riverbed running through there, if you look on the British Geological Society website, there is data on there there is data on there that's saying there are fluvial deposits which significantly indicate that a river at some time ran through it. So that's the first concern, and certainly one that was voiced quite vociferously. The second one was that the area just by the crematorium on that particular road is a well-known accident black spot. Julian, the chair from Dummer, put it very succinctly. But in the last 10 years, between the A30 and the A303, there's been 7 accidents, including 1 fatality. Again, if you look at just by the crematorium, okay, and then the Wheatsheaf pub, which is quite often used by our residents for wakes from the crematorium, there were 11 accidents just on that junction there, including 1 fatality. And then again on the actual junction with Popham Lane, there were 3 further accidents. So it is a well-known, documented accident black spot, and obviously any planning that would need to go ahead would need to look at the junction and try and mitigate that. The third and final one, I think, is probably the most important, and certainly the one that was mentioned most was, and it's been mentioned by almost every single person that's spoken before me, and that's with transportation. A lot of the residents of North Waltham are rather dismayed that they're going to be getting it's purported that they're going to be getting a cemetery attached to the crematorium, and a lot of people have been saying that really it's just too remote. Okay, 7 miles from the centre of town, 3.5 miles from the Sainsbury's roundabout. We need to have something that's a bit more accessible by people. I know that we're looking at a shared taxi service, but again, when I pointed this out to residents last night, it was said, "Oh right, so that will go, that'll be paid lip service to for a couple of months, and then that too will be axed, just like the public transport for the crematorium." Okay, now whether that's right or whether that's wrong, that's the public's perception. That within the crematorium, planning proposal, the public perception out there, certainly in North Waltham, is that public transport was there, and it didn't appear. Okay, so it's something we certainly need to address. Having said that, I think whilst the crematorium is almost a one-off destination spot, thank you, Chair, a one-off destination spot, a cemetery isn't. I recently buried my sister-in-law, and I can tell you now that I'm going, as often as I can to where she's buried. So it's a destination.
Thank you. That is your time. Thank you. What I would, that I think is the people who've said they would like to speak. I've not missed any. Oh, there was one more councillor who wasn't sure whether he was going to speak. Is he here and is he going to speak? No. Yes? Okay, right. Make it a proper cross-party event. We'll have Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Chairman. I really only approached because I sat on the original committee that considered all the sites that were put before us at that time, and we took a view that the North Waltham site was eminently more appropriate than any of the others. Most of the smaller urban sites, unfortunately, had limited capacity, so we weren't really solving a problem, just deferring it for a sort of 15, 20 years before we'd end up sitting around this table, those of us that are still here, facing the same problem, and again looking at North Waltham having perhaps missed the opportunity to purchase that option. Many have mentioned Manydown, and certainly things have moved a long way in Manydown since the decision we first looked at in September 2012, and it was September 2012, I remember it very well. Things have moved on a long way, but we have to be very careful with Manydown, because we've all recognised that our housing need will be met by Manydown, and it does seem that at times, whenever we have a problem in this council, the solution is Manydown. And as big as it is, and as large as it is, we are desperate to have a country park there. We want to make sure there's a clear break to protect the heritage of Oakley, which I'm sure is something you're passionate about, Chair. So if we were to put a cemetery there taking up 15 acres of something else would have to slip. It'd have to shift. So whilst I think it's right, we do have explore Manydown as an option, I think it's very important that we keep the North Waltham idea alive, because it is really the only option on the table. I appreciate the concerns around transport and traffic to the site. Obviously, road improvements can be part of the planning process to make the road safer. In terms of transport, there is that confused issue we have where we say lots and lots of people want to go there, but there's no way they're going to run a commercial bus service because not enough people will use it. Well, either it's remote and not many people want to use it and we've got to look at taxi share, or it's going to be a very popular destination a few years in, and therefore there may be opportunities for commercial bus service. It's important we do solve the transport issue. I recognise that it's something that's got to be resolved, and people have to be able to get out there to see their loved ones. But it was the most appropriate site in 2012. I will be surprised if, when we explore Many Down, there is a better solution there, simply because if you put 15 acres of Many Down as a crematorium, as a cemetery, then 15 acres of something else needs to go somewhere else. And I'm not entirely sure where that is, and until I'm sure where that is, we may not support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, committee, what I'd like us to do is before we start asking questions, I'd like the officer to take us through all the points, the main points, but I was trying to draw together in little groups because I have to summarize all this at the end. So if we can test the officer's ingenuity at doing some responses to some of these points in a sort of slightly structured way, that may then provide a structure for our ongoing questions and debate. So I'll try and follow what the order in which you do it.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best. Right, just working through the notes that I've got, and please highlight if I've missed any of the points that were being made. There's a suggestion that if we stop selling our pre-purchase graves, that would extend the life of the cemetery, and that's certainly true. By stopping selling them, of course, we stop those with a local connection to that cemetery from being able to be buried there. But also, I'm advised that would only extend the life of that cemetery by 1 to 2 years. So if it's up to that, if we're talking of that length of time, that actually is not significant in the context of this decision. There was reference to the availability of other sites, generally in the urban area, and there was a particular reference to the Kempshot site, by which I think the speaker was referring to the Homesteads Road site. In terms of the other sites in the urban area, these were looked at in 2012. The situation, I don't believe, has materially altered since 2012 as far as those particular sites go. It's true to say that they're all significantly smaller than the North Waltham site and would not offer anything like the 90 years capacity that is available at North Waltham. The Homesteads Road site, I just refer to the appendix, if I may, because it is specifically referred to. Yes, it's only 2.5 miles from the centre of town. It's not on a bus route. It's likely to have to be accessed by residential roads, contrary to the North Waltham site, and it's certainly a focus of activity by a local conservation group. Now, I just pick up on that particular site as it was mentioned specifically. But the same sorts of issues apply to the other sites in the urban area. And we should not, I think, underestimate the difficulties in looking to achieve cemetery use on an existing green space in the town, and the report refers to that. There was clearly a suggestion that Many Down would offer an alternative, and of course, at face value, why wouldn't it? It's an enormous area. But the appendices attached to the report show that to the north of the railway line, i.e. the first major phase of Many Down, up to 2029, there is no space for cemetery use, if we're to achieve the number of dwellings that's being proposed, which is in the order of 3,400, I believe. 15 acres of what could be development land at an average housing density of 35 to 40 per hectare, we're looking at something in the order of 200 to 250 houses that would not be provided on Many Down that could otherwise be. And of course, we're looking at the development value as well of that land. So we'd be forgoing that. We may not be paying money out now for it, but we'd be in effect paying for it for that use in nil receipt for housing. There were two sites suggested, I think, in Manydown. One, the location of Farm Shop, and one, Woodland by Wootton St Lawrence, and I must admit I'm less clear on that. But I think my comments about the non-availability of land up to in the plan period apply. Now, of course, that then focuses attention to the land, in effect, mainly south of the railway, for which isn't included in the local plan proposed allocation. Unfortunately, no planning has taken place on that area, and certainly no planning to an extent where we could determine where is an appropriate site for a cemetery without prejudicing potential other options for that land in the long term. If it was possible to pluck a field out of thin air now, and we could be happy that it wasn't going to prejudice other future initiatives, that in itself would be in the middle of nowhere. It would be between Oakley and Basingstoke. It would be a field that would have to be as unlikely to be on a bus route, quite frankly, and would have its own transport issues. In terms of transport to the North Waltham site, there's been mention of a bus service. Now, it is expensive to support bus services, clearly, but if it's to be meaningful, it would have to be a very regular bus service. It's no good a bus service being 3 or 4 times a day. Whilst I can fully understand bereaved wanting to visit and mourn, if they're deposited by a bus and have to spend the next 2 to 3 hours on the site, I don't think that's an appropriate way, and I don't think it's feasible for this council to support a bus service of sufficient regularity to make it meaningful for mourners' use. A taxi share is different, and just to emphasise, it's not sharing a taxi with somebody else, it's sharing the cost of the taxi. That's where the taxi share comes from. There may be another passenger in there, but that's not a determinant. If an individual wants to visit the site, and I see no reason why that service shouldn't be available at the weekends, and no one else wants to visit that site at that time, that individual will be taken there individually. They're not relying on 2 people or 3 people booking that service. But that's only one alternative.
Can I just clarify, just because we won't save everyone credit? And at the same cost, whether it costs the same, whether there's 1, 2, 3 or 4 people in the...
Yeah, the Borough Council will be providing the same subsidy, absolutely. But taxi share is only one option, and we refer in the report to potential agreement with Dial-A-Ride, Basingstoke Community Transport. The figure of £15,000, I acknowledge, it's very difficult at this stage predicting what we'll need in 2018, 2019. But in my view, there should be a firm commitment for that funding. It isn't just 1 year's funding, that is a revenue funding item, and that's there ad infinitum. So it isn't, and I just want to correct that impression, it's not just for a year. Now, I don't know what promises or otherwise were made as far as public transport goes in relation to the crematorium, but I would be surprised if in the fact there is none, that there was be very surprised if there had been a firm commitment made by this council to provide it, and it subsequently wasn't. There may have been discussions around it, but I'm afraid I can't comment on that. But I think it would be reasonable, if and when a decision is taken on North Waltham, for a firm commitment to be given by this council. There was mention about facilities on the site. It's certainly not the intention in the short term to provide a chapel on that site. I don't believe it's reasonable to look to dual use of the chapel on the crematorium. Having spoken to Dignity and witnessed the way it operates myself, it's operating more or less at capacity. In the short term, we would propose the use of the chapel on the Worthing Road cemetery site. However, the report does mention that in the medium to long term, the council may wish to invest in a chapel on that site. There was reference to accident black spots, and I acknowledge that there are accidents that recur on several of the junctions. I'm not aware of the statistics over 10 years that were quoted, but the report and the response to consultation does refer to the 5-year accident statistics, which we've obtained from the County Council. I'd just like to emphasise that a full traffic impact assessment would be required to support any planning application, and as part of that, of course, there'd need to be a detailed consideration of numbers, times of day, and whether indeed there's any junction improvements required to render the proposal acceptable. There was a question about whether the circumstances had changed significantly since the September 2012 report, and it was September 2012. The only significant change has been the availability of Manydown. In September 2012, of course, that was still not finalised. And of course, I hasten to add, Manydown isn't yet been confirmed in the local plan, so we're assuming that'll happen. Well, it may very well do, but at the moment, the site with certainty is North Waltham. There was a question about when we'd intend to submit a planning application. The earliest would be November of this year. That could spill over into early 2015. There was a suggestion about extending the Children's Hospital cemetery. We did look at the Children's cemetery in association with the NHS, thinking that it might offer an opportunity. It was one of the sites that had been identified, and that's not the case. It's not available. With regard to the concerns of the North Waltham residents, the issue of the riverbed through the site, it was actually raised in one of our written responses, and as I think was acknowledged, the EA, who would obviously lean on for this sort of advice, we're not aware of an underground watercourse, or there is a band of surface water flood risk following the valley line. More detailed investigations, including boreholes, will be necessary to support any planning application on the North Waltham site, and we would look very carefully into that issue. Sorry, my notes aren't clear now. Is there any other issue I need to have covered?
That was going to be my question to the committee. Was there any, but before we start our own questions, was there anything that you felt there was of particular interest from what the various visiting speakers said that Tim hasn't answered? Okay.
I just recall that I can now read my writing. There was a suggestion that the crematorium is a one-off destination, and of course for many that's true. But anybody who's visited the crematorium will realise there are an awful lot of memorials there. And people do choose to have the cremated remains buried there. So I think it's fair to say that those people who choose to do that, that they will be visiting the crematorium site more than on a one-off basis.
I'm just going to ask you to clarify a couple of the points you've covered. Just get the facts. You've answered the point about whether there would be a chapel on site. I think you didn't pick up Councillor Mrs. Francome's point about whether there would be some sort of security on site or staff on site, and I think that would be worth answering. And the other key point I think that was implicit in a number of the contributions was that, all right, I think there's a general acceptance that perhaps we don't know what's going to happen on South Manydown now, but hopefully we will know before too much longer. And the implicit in these was an option that maybe one of the smaller town sites would keep us going until we knew what we could do longer term on South Manydown.
With regard to South Manydown, I'll need to refer to the report, which I think it refers to 2020, by which time there'll be clarity over the planning of the South Manydown, south of the railway, which of course is far too far afield for the purposes of cemetery provision.
So I think the point that was being made was, couldn't you have one of the smaller ones that might last 5 years that would take us through to that point?
It would be possible to use a urban site as a stopgap, However, there are problems, I think, around the acceptability of a conversion of public open space use to cemetery use. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that, well, from my perspective, that was an issue that was relevant to be considered in 2012. I think it's worth reminding this committee that the previous Overview and Scrutiny Committee was actually quite happy with us moving directly to a planning application on the North Waltham site. But following discussion with the portfolio holder, we felt it was important that we at least considered Many Down as an alternative and that we consulted on the North Waltham site. The previous committee was happy that we moved to a planning application and that any public consultation would have been undertaken purely as that. So I think it's important to say that we moved beyond that recommendation and consulted widely, including in Basingstoke and Deane today, the results of which were more in favour than against. But as you'll have read the appendix which summarise those comments, I won't refer any further to that.
Is that, we've had all the responses on the points raised by the public speakers. Your own question now, and we will try and be disciplined and just ask questions. We'll have the speeches afterwards, okay? Councillor Washburn.
Thank you. My question is in regard to the transport, and obviously we seem to be kind of like move more towards looking at a shared taxi service, and also looking at the two local community transport providers that are currently Dial-A-Ride and I think BCT. Do we know if they have capacity for an increased demand that obviously would come from this type of usage? And obviously, as we know, grants are constantly being cut year on year. You know, are their services still going to be in existence for the 90 years that this cemetery is purported to give us?
It's difficult to know whether those organisations will have capacity in 2018, 2019 and 2020 when it's due to, the new cemetery would come on stream. The reasoning behind the additional revenue budget is to support those groups or similar groups to broaden their capacity so that in fact we are able to provide that service. I'm of course not able to comment on whether those particular organisations will be in existence over the life of the new cemetery.
Any more questions? No? Thanks, Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Chair. Out of pure curiosity, how long would it take to review some alternative sites?
Depends on what that review involves, but my team isn't resourced to do that during this financial year, I can assure you. The review would take many months.
Okay, thank you. So if I can row back to the Housing Environment WASCOM of September 2012, it does say that they were that sites were rejected. Can you give us a quick rundown of which sites they were, please? And if possible, why they were rejected?
Sorry, Chair, I just need to look at my notes. Right, the 6 sites that were shortlisted, and I believe that was from a site of from a total of 23 potential sites. And I say I believe that's the case because that work was undertaken before I took over responsibility for the project. But the sites that were shortlisted were the land adjoining North Waltham Crematorium, land at Homesteads Road, Chemshop, which I've already referred to, land at Old Common London Road, which might ring a few bells, the Many Down land, the land at the junction with Kingsclear Road and Rooksdown Lane, and there were 2 sites there, both of which are no longer available. So there were 4 sites that were available, that are now available, that were looked at in the analysis in 2012. Without referring in detail to that 2012 report, I'm not able to give you a rundown of why they were rejected at that stage. I'm very sorry, but that was an issue that was considered by that committee, and I hadn't appreciated it would be revisited at this stage.
Is Councillor right? For now, yes, okay, well, we'll come back on the debate. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. Very similar to Councillor Cousins there. My thoughts, as the professionals have spoken about the where they think or what we should do as regards cemetery provision. I mean, my thoughts are this is sort of like a Heathrow and Gatwick approach. We seem to want to put everything in one big place, and it's going to be massive and it's going to be fantastic. And my view is quite clearly, if I live in the town, I want to be very close by so people can come and see me, but I don't have to go 10 miles, and I certainly don't have to go another 12 miles somewhere else. Really, there should be provision throughout the town. It shouldn't be just in one site. And I know you might have said that you've looked at this, but I think we really need to have, if Kemp Shot's a viable proposition, then that should be the case. And there must be other sites in town that can give us those years of provision for cemetery provision and also transport provision as well. I'm sorry, Officer Tim, that I truly don't believe the statements on the transport, because we can't even run a Sunday service on most of our buses currently, so people wouldn't be able to get anywhere. And the taxi thing, I suspect in a year or two will just be, we'll axe that because there'll be some other urgency in where the money needs to go. So what I'd like to say to you is, I know you haven't got time this year in this year's work plan to do any more research on this, but I think it does need to be researched again. But I really want you to consider splitting up the provision of cemeteries throughout the town, not in one great big location. Thank you.
Comment on the feasibility now. Sorry, I need to be frank. I think it is totally unrealistic to expect us to be able to achieve a pepper potting of small cemetery provision at various sites within the town. And there speaks an officer with extensive experience of proposing schemes on which utilise open space, usually regeneration schemes, but nevertheless cause a significant degree of controversy. And I don't see that being acceptable to those living immediately adjacent, who value their open spaces and the use that they make of them.
A question, you can come back to it again in debate, but if you've got a supplementary question, please ask your question. Otherwise, come back when we get to debate.
Well, sort of. I just think this is very much a human element, and it's not about anything other than that. And I think we need to take that into account. That's not sort of a question.
Councillor Miller?
Tim, I know it's there are constraints around the town of Basingstoke for the availability of open space. That comes on another topic on this particular committee, and I think most of us have been through some fairly dire conversations about this, and it is extremely valuable to the residents of Basingstoke. However, Manydown's not the only development that's going ahead in the local plan, and as we all know, the shape of Basingstoke is rather elongated, that lozenge shape. The main crematorium and cemetery is down to the southwest. Would there not be a possibility of looking up to the northeast to allocate some of the land? It's for development in those terms of maybe residential, but to incorporate somewhere within this land in the local plan, there must be some space available to have the contra cemetery to the other side of town. Now, I live in Shinham. Getting down to the crematorium is one haul, and there is no bus service that's going to do it for us, or for anybody in that neck of the woods. You look at Popley, and you've heard from Councillor Frankham tonight. It's a long way down there for her. Now, is there any possibility of looking into the northeast? You've probably heard my comments about development in the northeast, but why not incorporate a cemetery? because it's part of the development, it's part of a community. That's what we're developing, are communities. We'll try and hold them together. If you get the balance, may I suggest, on the two sides of this rather stretched out town of ours, surely that brings it into balance. It is worth considering.
I can understand the point being made. I've got a lot of sympathy with that. Of course, as a council, and in particular as a local planning authority, we can only oblige developers to provide facilities that are necessary as a consequence of their development. We're not able to oblige them to provide a broader town-wide or part-town-wide facility which has nothing to do with their development per se. Now, any commercial developer would not do that unless we were prepared to pay for that such facility. If that facility was occupying potential housing land, we would have to pay housing value for that land. So they're just some of the issues with regard to the, as I see it immediately, with your suggestion.
Chair, I won't pursue this because we could get into rather deep discussion, and I think it's probably appropriate for another committee. But I will tuck that into the back of my mind and bring it to the appropriate committee at the appropriate time. But I think it's worth exploring.
Councillor Bierman, it's you then.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, Mr. Bosky, in discussions with Dial-A-Ride, how they are progressing and whether there's really a positive response from them, because in my contacts with them, and I have had quite extensive contacts over a period of time for one reason or another, and I've always thought it was a tremendous service, and I've said, why aren't you doing more? And one of the things they made quite plain was that they are unable by their terms of reference to do much beyond the type of thing they are already doing. And indeed, it was put to me, I might be mistaken in this, and it might be worth checking, that if they were to digress into the sort of thing that's being suggested here, they would lose such subsidy as they get from the county council. Now, I don't know whether that is known to you, but if they lose the subsidy, they might well say, sorry, do your own thing, we're not interested.
As I understand it, and certainly based on the discussions that were being held last year, Dial-A-Ride currently operates an on-demand service to the North Waltham crematorium. No, an on-demand service, yeah? And whereby registered users can pre-book a journey and pay the relevant fare. And of course the fare varies depending on the collection point, but they do provide that service at the moment, so I'm not quite sure what the problem would be in the future. But Dial-A-Ride is only one option, and it's not an option that we can negotiate for this time next year. It's an option that we'll need to discuss in the context of those community transport providers that are able to support this in 2018, 2019, 2020. So we can have outline discussions, but of course the landscape may change. But our view is that we feel something in the order of 15,000 will allow that Basingstoke Community Transport or some other transport provider to step in, including the taxi share potentially, to provide the transport to the new cemetery.
Okay, we're done with questions. Right, good. And now I'm going to try and sort of structure the debate a bit, if I can. Let's see how it goes. I think we should start by checking whether we're agreed on the issue that's facing us. So, Tim, save me trying to look back in the papers. The basis is that the current cemetery is expected to be full by which year, and if a decision was made by Cabinet or the Cabinet member to go ahead with seeking planning permission next month, or that the decision was made next month or the end of this month, how soon there might be a facility at North Waltham?
Worthing Road Cemetery is predicted to reach capacity between 2019 and 2020. And if I can refer you to the programme at 7.1 in the report, page 20, we're talking of the earliest 2018-2019 when the new cemetery is being maintained and could be open for use at that point if necessary, but certainly it could be open in 2019-2020. What we'd like to do, and this applies to any cemetery site, is not to open it, just say it is a field to open a broad field. We would like to establish a proper planting structure, to maintain it to a good standard before officially opening it, so that there is a quality of experience there, rather than a corner of a large field that's only recently been sown with grass. So what we're hoping to get there before it's absolutely needed, so that we can actually maintain it and manage it properly to provide an appropriate environment. And that would apply whichever site we go for.
So the proposition is that we've got very little time, should that be what people wanted to do, to reconsider options while still having a cemetery available by the time the current one is expected to be full. And even picking up the suggestion from the funeral directors would only give us another couple of years. Okay. Any comments on that? I mean, do we accept that? Do we query that? Do we, a committee prepared to, do we agree that that is the challenge facing us as a council, or do we think, there's some easier answer? Councillor Cousins.
Yeah, I think I agree with Councillor Miller's comment there, which is we accept the challenge. It's just now the case of, do we think what's laid out in front of us is the right option? And speaking personally, I don't think the option at North Waltham is the right site. I am a Basingstoke resident. I'm not a resident of North Waltham. So when my day comes, I would like to be in Basingstoke, not North Waltham. One hopes it's a long time away, of course, but I mean, from looking at the paperwork, everything is geared towards let's take on North Waltham and let's get on with it now. Now, in the paperwork, we have got the option to extend the offer towards us from North Waltham. I believe that we should be looking to extend that potential offer, and we should be investigating other sites to look at. I think Many Down is the most logical place to consider. We own the land already. We don't have to pay out on top of it in order to gain that piece of land. It's already there and available for us to use. Let's use it. Tim mentioned his comment that we would lose potentially 200 to 250 homes. I mean, yes, we would have to find those another 200, 250 homes somewhere. But again, it's part of the challenge, and I'm sure that as a council, we can do it. I'm sure we can do it. So I will leave my contribution at that for now, Chair, and I will see what other members of the committee have to say.
I'm impressed we could ask Tim to comment, because I'm very conscious he didn't mention it. We're not the sole owners of Many Down. We'd have to take certainly the county council with us, and I suspect the landowners who stand to make quite a lot of profit out of whatever happens. I'm never quite sure how much influence they have over this, but it always strikes me as it's quite a lot. So I don't know whether Tim can indicate whether there's been any sort of discussion with the other landowners at all, or exactly whether you think that would be a significant problem. But I think the other point you make, you didn't try and put a figure on it, but not only would we have to find somewhere else for the 250 homes, we'd lose the profit from selling them on. We would lose our quarter, and the others would lose their quarter and their half of the profit from selling the homes on that bit of Many Down.
I'm not overly familiar with the arrangements, the landing arrangements with Many Down, but it would need to be a tripartite agreement between ourselves, the trustees and the county council to allocate any site for cemetery use, whether north or south of the railway. Chair, I just want to be clear, are we in debate now or questions of officers?
We're in debate.
I just want to know whether to relax or not.
We're in debate, but don't relax. We are in debate. So I was trying to take it step by step. So, but I think we're not questioning the statement that it will run out. And if we were going to replace it with one big cemetery, we need to be starting planning permission for that fairly soon. Right. Councillor Westbrook. Yes, it's all right. The brain's just slowing down, but it was working. Thank you. Nice voice prompt on my right has been very helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate Councillor Day's point earlier about the fact that, we've got to make sure that, a sensitive issue like this is about people. We're talking about revenue and costs and profits and everything else. And I think that's the thing we should make a note of and bear in mind in this committee, really, when we talk about it. Thanks.
Of course, can I just press you on that? I mean, it's about people, whether we build or don't build. It's about people if we run out of provision as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it just sounded a little bit insensitive, that was all, at that particular moment in time. Bearing in mind the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I'd just like to make a comment. The present cemetery at the crematorium is very, very peaceful and much loved by everybody who goes there. The idea that a field next door could be used for the same purpose, not necessarily the crematorium, but the actual cemetery side of it, I think would be much appreciated by the people whose families were buried there. I think we should think about the site itself and the people who will be involved. I appreciate the problem of the transport, and I always have appreciated that. But if we can get over that hurdle, I think the North Waltham site makes sense. I'd just like to refer to the Manidown area. Part of where people are suggesting, wouldn't it be nice to have a cemetery? There are actually oil pipelines that go through. Some are alive and some are old, but I can't see quite a cemetery and pipelines going together.
My comment to that would be, if you were going to explore this, you'd also explore putting it near a working village and making it part of the setting of the conservation area, but which will be clear of the pipelines. But who have I said after that? Councillor Day.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of the things there is also that there'd be no chapel provision, and I think that's appalling, quite frankly, that people go to a cemetery, or if I go to my parents are buried, we have a church that I can actually go in the church and it feels so much more comforting than just having to be at a grave in the middle of nowhere, because that's what North Waltham is. I know it's very nice. I have relations out there as well, and it's a very beautiful spot, but I don't think it's right for the residents of Basingstoke. And the other point I want to make as well is about the 250 homes suddenly just came up there. It's like we're going to not build 250 homes because we're going to have a cemetery in maybe Manidown. Well, we're building thousands of homes in Manidown over many, many years, and 250 homes lost over many, many, many years is probably not a lot at the end of the day. And we would have found, as Councillor Cousins quite rightly said, we would have found a different location for those homes. So I don't want to get hooked in on how much money the council might lose. It's about the deceased and people that are grieving, that are loving for their lost ones. And we must never lose sight of that, okay? And that's all I want to say.
Just to explain, my concern on that, and it's a genuine concern, is that it's not just us that would lose money. Even if we were prepared to lose it, I'm a bit sceptical that we would persuade the other parties to agree to it. On the bit that's within the local plan, south of the railway line, which isn't in the local plan, I have considerable reservations about why decisions can't be made there rather more quickly than is moving at the moment. But again, we're not in control of that timetable. Tim, though, can you just, because I told you not to relax, why could there not be a chapel provision sooner than you envisage?
There could be. We just need to make an early financial allowance for it. I think it's worthwhile pointing out that the chapel at Worthing Road Cemetery isn't available for visitors' use. It's available for services. So I wouldn't want anybody to get the impression that it's open from between 9 and 6 o'clock every day. And in fact, I've just been handed the average number of chapel services for the year, for last year, is 37. So I just think we need to get all this in context. It's my view is we should provide a chapel at some point in the future. I don't think we need to make that choice now on any site, but please get it in perspective. It's not used day in, day out, during the working day. It's not. It's the one at Worthing Road is available for services.
Average of 37 a day. Did you mean a total of 37 of the year? An average of 37 a month?
37 a year.
Yeah, right.
Did I say a day?
An average of 37.
Oh, yeah, 37 a year.
Come on, Mrs. Tucker. Yes.
Sorry, just on that point, if we're putting in for a planning application, could we not put in and include in the planning application something like a chapel or whatever? We don't necessarily have to build it, but at least it would be incorporated.
The first planning application would be an outline planning application for the principle of changing agricultural land to cemetery use. Only if we got that would we need then to consider the point you're making. That detailed planning application would follow several months after the outline. The important thing in relation to the option is to obtain sufficient assurance through an outline permission that we can then exercise the option agreement. Yeah.
Councillor Miller next.
Thank you, Chair. I think the one thing that we want to have for the provision of a cemetery is exactly what Councillor Mrs. Tucker said. The ambience on the Worthing Road Cemetery, I've been there, unfortunately, twice. And I think it is exactly as she describes it. It's a peaceful, it's a very nice, quiet place. I think we're getting, I don't know, it's just my feeling. I know provision of transport in whatever form is an important factor. But I think the pressures that are being applied to the council, to the councillors, to the residents of Basingstoke are that we're going to run out of time and space. Time in terms of going through the processes of getting the right kind of site and the land available to provide for the cemetery capacity that we need, but also the space in the existing cemetery that we have at Worthing Road. I think we've got to focus on what's the priority. Is identifying some land and getting it into council ownership so that we can do what we need to do in the shorter term. We've heard that the possibility of doing this on Manydown is not viable because that's the time window is closing on us. If we could do something now, great, but I don't think we can because of the various processes that hoops we've got to go through. It sounds doubtful whether we can get an interim site. Now, I'm not that knowledgeable around the town, but it would strike me that somebody's going to have to give up, as Tim Bosky mentioned, there's going to have to forfeit open space. And I'd be very reluctant to do that in any existing open space we've got around, but I think we're pretty short of it at the moment. The question of transport, that's something ultimately is on our hands in the council. There are various options that have been put forward in this paper that can be examined. But I think we've got to identify the ground first and do what we need to do to secure that as a cemetery. I think the other things, and I'm not pushing them to one side because I'm not decrying that, we've got to look at a transport solution. But I think that can be done in a shorter time scale than actually getting hold of the land, getting that outline planning permission in. And I hear what the funeral directors have said, but correct me if I'm wrong, this is not much further out, surely, than where the existing cemetery is it? I look at this map, it's next door to the crematorium. Yes? Yeah, thank you. So, and how long's that cemetery been in existence? 20 years, 25 years, 30 years?
Can we just clarify that? It's very close to the existing crematorium. The existing cemetery is about a mile from the town centre. Councillor Cousins' ward, I suspect.
Okay. However, isn't the crematorium, I know what's in the grounds of the crematorium because that's where you get cremations and a lot of the remains are kept there and you have a memorial. But if we've got people going to the crematorium anyway, and that's not the sole purpose of, people get have funeral services in churches and elsewhere. But there's an awful lot of traffic goes down to the crematorium today. So it seems to me, logically, maybe perversely, that this is the right site because we're putting it all together. We've got to come up with some other ideas. And we better come up with some other ideas now. If somebody has some better ideas, I'd quite happily support them. But I haven't heard any tonight. It looks like some investigation has gone on in the last 18 months, and we're faced with this, not a decision, but a recommendation to proceed. I think we can cure the transport problem later on, but it seems to be the only viable site that I've heard tonight. That's my only offering, but let's get the priorities wrong. Right. I will take that back for the webcast. We've got to get the priorities right, and the priorities to me is getting the land. The other thing we can address at another time is getting the transport sorted out. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Washbourne.
Thank you. I mean, we seem to be kind of like skirting around the issue. Obviously, we need to find a site, but obviously, time and time again, we're coming up with obviously the transport provision as being one of the biggest stumbling blocks, and I think it is. And obviously, we've got an urban town centre, and we're purporting to have a cemetery in a rural area. We're offering, or we seem to be offering, possibility of shared taxi services, or we seem to be offering the local current community transport providers or providers in the future will be able to provide transport to this cemetery in this rural area. But we're not firming anything up in regard to the transport. Yes, we do need to provide cemetery provision, but we also need to provide an assurity to those who are going to be visiting that cemetery provision that they will be able to get there when they want to get there. Obviously, the majority of the time we're talking the elderly that are wanting to be visiting the cemetery. And obviously, as we know, as we get older, we're less likely or feel less capable to drive. We're more reliant on our family and our friends, and obviously then more reliant on this transport provision, which doesn't seem to have any firmness to it to me. We may be able to have a shared taxi service, or we may be able to use these providers, but we'll sort it out in the future. I think our residents will want to have some kind of assurity that they will be able to reach their destination when they want to, and not have to rely on friends and neighbours to get them there, and also have that feeling that they'll only be able to visit when it suits others, because I don't think that's right for this type of provision.
Yes, so Councillor Each wants to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to respond to what Councillor Washbourne just said. I would like to give that assurance that we are going to look at other transport schemes and to commit to assisting residents to get there. And as Tim has said earlier, a taxi share would not be you have to wait for 4 or 5 other people to get in there. If an individual wanted to do that, we would be looking to ensure that that was possible. So we can't commit Dial-A-Ride or another company now because we're looking at 2018, 2019, but I can give the reassurances that we are committed to dealing with the issue of transport.
Oh, sorry, I can't.
Yes, come back.
I was just going to say, well, thank you for that, but obviously you're giving a commitment that you're going to be looking at it. That doesn't give that reassurance that there will definitely be that service for a period of time. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns around transport to get there.
I think the difficulty we've got is I can't give the commitment that the X company will do it because it's 2018, 2019, but I can say we will be looking for someone to assist us, and we will be putting forward that that there is a revenue, a constant stream of revenue that will support any scheme, and that will be top of the agenda, is to ensure that transport is dealt with.
Councillor Bound.
Sort of briefly, I mean, I've listened very carefully to what's been said tonight, and I have to agree with basically what Marilyn said and Paul said later, that I think the site as proposed out at North Waltham is an ideal site. It is tranquil, it's peaceful. Yes, it is rural. I don't see what the problem is, that it's rural. Somebody's laid to rest there. I mean, I don't think they're going to know that it's rural or not rural, to be honest with you. The people who go there will have that sort of peaceful, tranquil experience. What it comes down to, from what I've heard tonight, is the transport problem. And solve the transport problem, and I can't see any problem with using North Waltham. And if we can have assurances from the portfolio holders who had tonight that this is being thoroughly investigated, then it's North Waltham for me.
Mr. Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. Transport is clearly the key issue. It's also quite clear in my mind that if we're looking at a site that we are expecting to make provision for 90 years, any sort of assurance that we'll sort out transport is meaningless. I don't even think that we're going to be able to do it for the next 10 years, because every time we've gone in for subsidised transport schemes, they've finished up falling apart because we're dependent on revenue. And as the county council will tell you, there's not much revenue, and therefore they can't subsidise the buses anymore. So they're copping out of longer term commitments. And equally, other authorities and even ourselves, we might be poor someday and decide to spend our money on other things than supporting bus travel. The one thing that is, or even taxi ride, or whatever this deemed solution is, the thing that's clear to me is if it's somewhere near the town centre, you're likely to have buses until climate change has stopped them altogether. We will be having buses in the inner town centre area, which we won't necessarily have out to North Waltham. So it's a completely different predictability and comfort. It was said in the report several times in different words, there are no showstoppers. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the transport issue is a showstopper. Because if people can't get there readily and economically and conveniently, in the end, they will be deterred from going. And we've all said that we want to give people the opportunity to have the comfort to visit the last resting place of their relatives. For instance, some time ago when this was last discussed, as a visiting councillor, popped along and queried the sites that were being looked at that stage. Councillor Frankham's actually touched on it, because I asked at that particular meeting and was told I'd get a feedback, which I'm still waiting for some years later, was why the end of Crockford Lane was not being studied seriously. Now, I'll tell you why I'm very enthusiastic about Crockford Lane. Basing Woods was what Councillor Frankham mentioned. It's threefold. One is pretty easily accessible. Two, when you're accessing, you're not disturbing anybody. Three, the site, for those that haven't been around as long as yours truly, might not know that the site there was previously considered for a crematorium. In fact, next to my house was considered for a crematorium, so it's wandered a bit. But all these sites were at the end rejected because of nearness to properties and the difficulties because of the pollution from crematoria. But that same thing doesn't apply to a burial site. And if you want tranquility, again, the name gives it away, Basing Woods. Wonderful opportunity to have a nice tranquil setting right near the centre of town, an area that would be very unlikely to be taken for housing because there would be a lot of people who would resist housing. I can think of at least one more colleague, I'm sure, who would say, not yet more housing. and at the same time, it's close and yet tranquil and pleasant surroundings, and would give an opportunity for what my great hobby horse of natural burial in a natural way in a woodland burial, as it's sometimes called. Until Councillor James spoke, I was going to say that I totally agreed with all the public speakers in every respect of what they said. Councillor James spoilt that run a little, but on one point, a little bouquet to him, at one point I do agree with him. Many Down has been mentioned a few times tonight. I couldn't really, in all honesty, support Many Down, partly for the reason that Councillor James mentioned, i.e. we keep on saying, oh, we need a site for this, that and the other, and we keep on saying, how about Many Down? And in the end, we'll have enough space for 500 houses because we found wonderful other uses for it. So I don't think I'd like to see that, not least because even though eventually with lots of houses it would finish up probably with better transport links, it's still quite a way out. And as one of the speakers said, we're trying to pursue sustainability and not have long journeys to places that people are visiting regularly. So I'm not at all sure about Many Down as a solution in this case, and the economics of the housing and so on. Well, we're trying to find spaces for housing so we don't go in other places, and I therefore don't think we should be taking housing land away that is perfectly viable and would be difficult to change from a housing intention on the sort of scale we're talking here. So, you know, I would like to sink any idea of the proposed site, very sorry to the portfolio holder, and I think in the time that's available, other options like Basingwood, like the end of Crockford Lane as it is, could be attacked.
Can I just clarify, Basingwood and the end of Crockford Lane, the same site, or two sites?
No, they're the same location. When you get to the end of Crockford Lane, it's no longer the end because it's been extended, but what used to be the end of Crockford Lane is Basingwood.
So it's not other sites, it's another site?
It's just another name for the same.
Yeah, fine, okay. Now, I've run out to the end of the list of people who haven't spoken at all. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken at all who wants their first turn before I start letting people have their second or third turns? Okay, fine. Councillor Cousins.
Thank you again, Chair. I just want to come back to what we're asked to look at tonight as an overall, which is, do we agree with option 1, option 1B, option 2, or option 3? Now, to counter Councillor Miller's point, which is time is against us, if option 2 and 3 are against the time constraints, then what are they doing there in the first place? If they are there as viable options, i.e. we investigate the Many Down option, taking in place the fact that we are not the sole landowner, it gives us that time to convey with our partners and say, is this possible? It gives us that time to do that investigation. Also, option 3 allows us to investigate not only the option that Councillor Beerman has just put before us, but other possible sites as well. And I also want to echo Councillor Beerman's contribution about transport being a showstopper. Yes, it should be a showstopper. And whilst I commend Councillor Reach's comment that yes, transport will be of a very significant and important factor in all of this, I would like to refer the comment made from the visiting councillor, Councillor Frost, to when the prospect of public transport was mentioned. The parish council laughed and said, yes, they said that about the crematorium as well. You know, let's get this into some kind of perspective. Yes, we know this is difficult and we know that we have to try and find a spot that the majority of people can agree with and can get along with. From where I'm sat and where I'm sitting, for many reasons, I don't think North Waltham is the right site. At the moment, we have no public transport that goes out there, and it doesn't, you know, history doesn't suggest that that's going to change. Yes, I take into the taxi share and the fact that it's the subsidy that is shared, not the taxi. But again, we have seen in the past that, yes, whilst they may start in good faith, they very rarely continue. And ultimately, yes, okay, North Waltham is an urban site, and yeah, I agree, it is very pretty. But as a Basingstoke resident, I would like to be buried, or my last resting place would like to be somewhere near the town in which I've spent a considerable amount of time in, not an extra added attachment to Basingstoke. That's why I think we should be refusing option 1, we should be refusing 1B, and we should be investigating option 2 and option 3. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get back to real time, and it's, what, 8:30 now in the evening. And tomorrow, if I wanted to go to the crematorium and I didn't have my car, I'd pop to the bus station and I couldn't get there. And I've heard what they've said about transport in the future, but actually, how about the council showing some real commitment then, in that case, and looking at providing transport to the crematorium next year in the next financial budget? You see, then I could be convinced, but currently it's just, oh, we'll put some transport on and it'll be fine. And, you know, if I'm still around in 10 or 20 years, I probably won't have a bus to get out there to visit wherever I need to visit or whatever, because you won't have provided it. So let's see some commitment. Let's see some real provision of transport up there. You know, the parish chairman has said there's a 55 that goes 4 days a week at school times or something. That's about it. I mean, there's thousands of people buried in the crematorium now. They must have relatives who haven't got cars. So how come we've ignored that and now we're now bringing it up now? Anyway, it's not a question. It's my final rant, if you like. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No, well, Officer, can I just try and draw a few threads together? This is not the end of the debate, but it's getting near the end of the debate. Okay. I mean, I think we've accepted that there is an issue, that space will run out in about 5 years, and we need to be doing something very soon to replace that. I will say personally, and I suspect it's a view shared widely around the committee, that North Waltham is at best far from ideal because of the transport issue. I suspect none of us are happy with the transport issue, and that if there was an alternative, we would probably all be quite keen on it. The issue is whether there is an alternative. I personally, again, would be very happy to support, or if we had the time, I would be very happy to support. I'm not saying we haven't got the time, but if we had the time, I would be very happy to support exploring either North Manydown or South Manydown. Just my experience of dealing with Manydown over many years leads me to be rather pessimistic about the prospects of that achieving anything. For the North, just to explain to Councillor Day, the landowners have set out very clearly which bit of Manydown they are intending to develop through to 2029. It's set out in the local plan, which is about to go off to the planning inspector. It would be very difficult to extend the amount planned for development through to 2029 at this stage, which means that and while I agree with Councillor Keating, actually where he said is a very sensible, you have to move off the oil pipelines, as Councillor Mrs. Tucker has pointed out, but that you could still be very near the proposed district centre and off the oil pipelines, and it would be a very sensible suggestion. But I really don't see the head of steam that's being built up over the Manydown plans through to 2029 being diverted to allow something as big as a cemetery there. I personally would be very happy if there was time, if we explored that, but I honestly don't see it achieving anything. As I said earlier, I'm very sceptical that we can't make more progress on what's to happen south of the railway line. And if we knew now and had agreed with the other landowners what was to happen south of the railway line, it might be possible to be planning to put a cemetery in fairly quickly. And contrary to what the officer said, it needn't necessarily be in the middle of nowhere. It would depend where you put it. But again, I am very sceptical that we would get any progress in certainly less than a year, probably less than 2 years, with the other landowners on agreeing that. So whilst if I thought it was feasible, I'd be happy. I'm sort of attracted to Councillor Bierman's suggestion, which chimes in with Councillor Miller's, that, you know, we've got a very long north-east, south-west town, and maybe something at the northeast and the southwest would be an answer. But I don't know whether anyone knows anything about the history. I can see why it wouldn't have been popular as a crematorium, but as Councillor Beam's entirely right. The issues for neighbours are rather different with a cemetery. So again, if there was time, I think I'd be quite keen to explore that. I just wanted to make sure the other thing points you to, I think we will need to say something about, we just have concerns, well, we'd like more work to be done on the facilities to be provided on wherever the new crematorium is, and the phasing of that. But I don't think that needs to hold up tonight's decision. And I think we ought to recognise the points made on behalf of North Waltham Parish Council about the possibility of a river and the accident record, but those are both issues that should be properly explored in any planning application. So I think whilst I would want us to say we would want to be sure that they were properly considered in any planning application, that is where they should be properly considered. So I think the question boils down to, and Councillor Cousins referred to other possible sites, and if there were other possible sites, you would have my support. But I as I say, I'm inclined to think that time is not on our side, and that pressing ahead with a planning application is not a decision to go ahead. It might get planning permission, might be refused. We might find that there is a river. And even when we had planning permission, that doesn't commit us to going ahead, does it, officer or portfolio holder? I mean, it would be wasted money if we didn't, but it's not a commitment.
No, we'd have paid the money by that point when the detailed planning permission would be being submitted, which, you know, as you say, may fall. But yeah, that's the reason we're going for outline planning before we enter in, exercise the option agreement.
So I do think we have, and I'm not proposing it, I'm just saying that we do have an option of saying we would support going ahead with putting in the planning application whilst at the same time asking for a bit more work on some of these other sites. But I don't think we can commission work on other sites that we haven't thought of, unless, you know, because I will let you come back, but I'm really, you know, Basingstoke is fairly well built up within Basingstoke, and unless you're going to start building a War Memorial Park or something, which I think we're not, putting a cemetery in War Memorial Park, which I think would not be popular, it is hard to think of where else you would put it. So we will let councillor issues go first, and then we'll let people respond to what I've said so far, and then we'll attempt another summing up.
Thank you. I just want to say I've obviously listened to everything that has been said, but I do see that this site has longevity, and it's the only site of ongoing certainty. All the other sites, even if they were possible, would just delay the issue and bring it back here again in another 5, 10, 15 years. The other sites have all been assessed, and it doesn't seem that anything has materially altered since they were assessed. The town centre has been mentioned on a number of occasions, but I can't see that there is any other viable site in the town centre unless people are saying that they want to build on open space in the town centre, which I think Councillor Golden's just covered. It's not what you're saying. The issue of many down, I think that's been said quite a lot this evening. It's quite obvious that there isn't any room in the first phase of the master plan to put the cemetery anywhere, and if it was put anywhere else on many down, we'd have the same transport issues. Then we're missing the fact that we're not the sole owners, so it isn't just our decision. People seem to be making the point that it could just be stuck on many down, that's the answer to all our problems, but we're not taking into account that we have to take 2 other parties with us. And it has been raised that the 15 acres that would be required would take up around 250 houses, where, okay, there may be other places in the borough to put the houses, but it's the loss of the development land and then the loss of opportunity costs there, which also need to be taken into account. And then going back to transport, I think I've made my position quite clear on that, and we do appreciate that that is the main issue, and we'll be dealing with that. I think we missed the point that it's not whether North Waltham's on a bus route, it's the fact of how regular that bus service is. And there's nothing to, even if we were to look at a bus route now, there's no guarantee that that bus route will be there in 2018, 2019. So we do need to be looking at this regularly, and when we do look at a taxi share scheme or other scheme in 2018-19, that does need to be constantly reviewed as the years go on, and should be reviewed. And I think that's everything.
Councillor Cousins, do you want to come back as I mentioned you?
Thank you, Chair. It was just on 3 things that you said in particular. One, that you said that there was a diminishing amount of time. Yes, there is a diminishing amount of time, but we do have the option to extend the offer of the North Waltham site. I'm proposing we use that extra time that we have. And to that, alternative sites, the option 3 doesn't say we want councillors to tell us what those alternative sites are. It just merely says, let us look at some alternative sites. And it says, it doesn't say it's impossible. It just says it is likely to be difficult. Difficult doesn't mean it's definitely not going to happen, which is why I'm keen on us looking at option 2 or 3. The other question, of course, is, let's say we do go for North Waltham, when we do fork out £500,000, it goes to planning and it's refused. We've just wasted £500,000 on something we can't use. So we're back into the circle all over again. Now, and again, I come back to, what's the point in paying out for something when we have got some facility to use some green space that we already have? Yes, okay, September 2012, we found some spaces and they weren't possible. That's not to say that we haven't got any more that we could potentially look at. Councillor Bierman has identified a site that we could potentially look at. I stress the word potentially. It's not saying we will definitely do it, but it's an opportunity to have a look at something. That's what option 3 is saying. Let's have a look and see if we could find anything else. If it turns out that we haven't, then we don't. But at least we've gone and we've looked and we've tried. That's what option 3 sets out. I think it's worth doing.
If I could just clarify a couple of things that I said. I think, well, let me say, I think option 3 is probably the officer being polite. When he says he thinks it's likely to be difficult to achieve, it means he doesn't think there's the remotest chance we'd all agree on somewhere within the town, which I think is probably true. I think if wherever you suggested using a large piece of green space within the town, some people would object. I don't think the proposal is we'd pay the 460,000 until we'd got the planning permission, at least the outline planning permission. As I read it, the recommendation is to go ahead and see whether we can get the planning permission, and if we can, then we'd have to pay the money. I hope that's true. Yes, I'm getting a nod from my left. So we would only be putting at risk the costs of the planning process, which is not negligible. But so I mean, I wasn't disagreeing that we could extend the option. I'm just, if we say put the decision back a year, we might not, and then went for North Waltham, it might not be up and ready and properly landscaped and prepared by the time Worthing Road is full. So that's why I was reluctantly, because I do think it's a long way out and I do think the transport is a real issue, inclined to say we don't currently have an alternative. We ought to press ahead with trying to get the planning permission, whilst not ruling out, notwithstanding the pressures on Tim's team, seeing whether we can do some extra work on Councillor Bierman's suggestion, which is the other suggestion. And if people want to, trying to make further explanations with Manydown, although, as I say, personally, I think that would be unlikely to get anywhere, but I've certainly no objection to trying.
I see Mr. Roski wants to speak, but I just perhaps in speaking he can answer a little pedantic point, but I just want to get it clear in my mind, this thing about at which stage we would potentially be liable to pay or to take out our option on the land. Because I'm not sure whether once we've got outline permission, we'd have to pay fairly soon after, or would it be nearer the stage when we are going in for detailed planning? I mean, how much breathing space would we have? And when you finish with questions, I just want to make a further comment, please.
In discussions with the current owner at North Waltham, there's been an agreement that we can extend the option agreement for 6 months. And during that period, we would need to apply for and hopefully achieve outline planning permission. Okay. Now, of course, we may not get that. So I wonder whether indeed there's a hybrid option that we do push forward with the planning aspects of North Waltham. The only at-risk money there is in preparing the outline planning application. If we're unsuccessful, then if we took a sequential approach, we'd then need to look at other sites. What we could do is to begin to look at those sites fairly shortly, but still pursue the planning application to see if we get the outline, because the landowner will not keep, I can assure you, will not keep extending this option. There is no guarantee they'd be prepared to extend the option, in which case we'd have very little alternative but to go hell for leather at this point for a outline planning permission. But with that extension, it guarantees we've got time to hopefully secure planning permission. If we don't, then, as I say, if we took the sequential approach, we'd need to look at other sites, and our options would be potentially diminishing. But perhaps we can look at what some of those options may be, and at that point, if we don't get planning permission, well, we'll have done some early work. If we do, then there may be a decision to be taken at that point. Do we then exercise the option? That's the way we could go forward if the committee felt that was appropriate, and indeed the cabinet agreed. But my view is, in relation to negotiations with the landowner and the North Waltham site, we should, as it's recommended in the report, pursue as quickly as possible an outline planning application for that site.
Thank you, Tim. That I think is what I was proposing, so that's worrying. But yes, that given the time pressures, we should accept that pressing ahead with putting in a planning application is a sensible precaution, but that we would want more work to be done, and we would want a report to come back here so we get a chance to have a final say before any decision would be made to implement the planning permission, even if we got it. Was that what you were envisaging, Tim?
Not necessarily.
Would it be reasonable? Sorry, could you live with us agreeing that?
No, joking apart, I need to look at the timescales, quite frankly, and the lead into committees and all the rest of it. And to be honest, we need to discuss it with the current owner as well, because I can't speak on their behalf, particularly as unfortunately the property services representative isn't available this week. But it seemed to me a sensible way forward, in that we would achieve what I was looking for from this and recommending that we move forward with North Waltham, but taking a precautionary approach and beginning to investigate the potential for other sites, which we'd need to do if, of course, North Waltham fell at the planning stage.
Just clarify, I was assuming that you would exercise the 6-month extension, which will take us through to September. By then, we will know about the planning application, probably. And you should have had time to do a significant amount of work, particularly on Councillor Bierman's site, where presumably there are papers that can be dug out from when it was being considered for a crematorium, so that we could certainly have a report back before the summer. And hopefully the Cabinet would be prepared to defer a final decision until we'd had another say. That would be my hope, because then you can get on with the one thing that probably needs to be doing now, which is putting in a planning application. Councillor Cousins, come on, I can see you'd like to have another go. And then Councillor Bierman.
What's being suggested now, I think, is something I could live with. I mean, I'd frankly hope that we would bury the North Waltham option tonight. If for time, because of fears of time, one were to let it run in parallel with the only financial risk, which is what I'm understanding it being the cost of putting in the planning application, personally I could live with that. And I just want to come back and challenge what you said, Chair, earlier about we'd have difficulties wherever we chose. The beauty of the Basingwood, Carpenter's Downwood site, and all the other names it's had, is that previously it had no objections other than the question of the emissions from the crematorium. And I can't believe, and I see Councillor Franken there nodding away, that there'd be any new objections. The only problem I see with that site is whether the landowner would still be willing to make the land available. But beyond that, I personally can't see the slightest thing. It even addresses my ward colleagues' issue.
Can I just clarify? My comment about not agreeing with did not apply to that site, because my geography may not be very good, but I thought that was on the edge of the town, whereas I was talking about sites within the town. Well, but anyway, even if it is within the town, I wasn't meaning that. No.
Thank you, Chair. We just talked about talking to other people, landlords, about the North Waltham site. Well, can I, and Councillor Ekus mentioned about we'd have to talk on Manydown to our partners in that, but when there was no firm commitment there to do that, can I suggest that we do that? So at least we have the full facts here, as if, I think, I don't know, the other Hampshire County Council, one of our partners, I'm not sure.
Group.
And the Manydown Group as well. So would that not make sense to do that as well? And then it's a sort of a fair playing field as opposed to rather than just dismiss Manydown totally.
I'd rather see it.
Personally, I think it would be sensible if that was the committee's mind. Yes, I'm certainly not trying to dissuade the committee from that. Are we approaching a consensus, folks, reluctantly, and with all the different degrees of reservation that, and officers can polish the text later because the night is running on. Given the time, we accept the analysis of when Worthing Road will run out and the lead time in developing a new cemetery. We have significant reservations about the transport implications with North Waltham, but if it turns out to be the only viable option, then we don't want it to be available too late. So therefore, we agree that the council should press ahead with seeking outline planning permission. And at the same time, we should address the other two known options, or three if you count North Manydown, South Manydown as separate options. Not forgetting that within North Manydown, Tim, and I meant to say this a little while earlier, Julian Jones suggested the woods north of Wood St Lawrence, which would be in the area covenanted against development, so it wouldn't be loss of development land. It might have access problems, but I think it would be worth at least addressing that as an issue. So that's three sort of Manydown options. We need a clear response from the other party. We need to know they've been consulted, and some analysis of the end of Crockford Lane, Chinham Woods option. Sorry?
Basing Woods.
Basing Woods, sorry, thank you, yes. Yeah, yes. Okay, fine. And that when we note the concerns expressed by North Waltham Parish Council regarding the possibility of a river and the road safety issues, but we would expect them to be fully explored in any planning application. Would they be fully explored at the outline stage, Tim?
Absolutely, yes. We'd be using a tier 2 and potentially tier 3 assessment that the EA requires, and they'd need to be satisfied with the work we've done.
And when the report comes back to us next summer, if the recommendation is again North Waltham having got planning permission, we would like a little more detail on the transport options and a little more reassurance that things would actually continue. And you know, so we'd like that firmed up a bit if that comes back. And I think the other thing is, would we like a bit more on the facilities on site and when they'd be available, or are we content with what's in here?
Chair, I think there was a general feeling that people would like a sort of an outline framework of how that might work and sort of timescales if it was going to happen, and general sympathy with there being something.
Is that okay at a high level, Tim? So not, you know, drawings and.
I mean, it's very, it'd be very interesting to understand the committee's perspective. I do have to emphasise I've got to look at the workload implications of what the committee's suggesting, and I can't commit to any timescales at this point in time. I've learned my lesson from doing that at previous committees.
Make it clear, we're looking for something before next summer so that it ties in with before the extended option runs out.
And that's on the assumption, in this context of the committee's discussions, that the landowner's willing to extend the option.
Right, I thought you said he was willing to extend 6 months from March.
Yeah, on the understanding that that was the site and the only site we were pursuing.
Okay, thank you. We note the clarification. Okay, right. Well, we'll hope your charm prevails. Is that it? Have I given you enough officers to write that up? Are we okay with that? Okay, can I suggest we give ourselves a 5-minute breather, go and fill the water jugs, and then we'll tackle the last two subjects well, we won't get finished by now. We'll do our best. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we can reconvene, and perhaps if someone could tell the folks outside, we're starting. Right, well, we have most people back. We've had a slight change around. Councillor Eaches is still with us, but we've now been joined by Frank Wright, who's the officer, but I think she's going to introduce this item. So we're now doing paper E, a strategy for trees in Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council.
Thank you, Chair. This strategy outlines the approach to the management of council-owned trees and woodland over the next 5 years. And I just would like to reiterate, it is council-owned trees and woodland, not other private trees. It's been prepared in response to a council motion of October 2014 that identified a need to address problems arising from council trees. We have invested £470,000 into this issue, and this report seeks the committee's views on the contents of the tree strategy, which will then be incorporated into a portfolio holder report. I do hope that this issue isn't contentious and that you all can agree that it's a very well written strategy and that the officers have worked extremely hard on putting this together, and it does take into account all tree issues.
Thank you. We have Councillor Mrs Frankham who wishes to speak to committee.
Thank you. Hello again. This is a really good report, but then I would say that, wasn't I? Because I served on the panel looking at the strategy. But what I wanted to do was to come here to publicly say how impressed that I was with the officer Frank Wright and the team, and the enormous and detailed work that they've done. It's a lovely, easy to read report that I think if a member of the public picked it up would actually understand what it's saying. Very often our reports are in councilese and not as well written as this. I really welcome, we all know, the tree officers, councillors, residents, we've got the wrong trees in the wrong places. Sadly, a lot of these trees that are already too big have got 5, 6, 7 years more of growth. Now, I love trees. I've got trees right outside that I look out from my kitchen window, and I would chain myself to it if anybody was to try and cut that down, because it's the right tree. It's a beautiful shape. It doesn't cause any problems. It doesn't cause shading. I love to hear the birds singing in the morning on there. But we have got a problem. In particular, we've got a problem along the Bund in Abbey, along the back of Abbey Road, along by the dual carriageway, where the trees that put there, I don't know, maybe they were bought on the cheap or something, but they're certainly the wrong trees. They cause enormous problems. So I really am glad that we are looking at this, and in this strategy we are making allowances that there are problems in urban areas. It's not just in rural areas. In fact, probably it's worse in urban areas So you don't exactly expect to be so overshadowed by trees that you can't take advantage of television, you can't take advantage of sky, you can't take advantage of solar panels. So I'm not saying get rid of the trees, we need to replant, but I'm really excited because I've been fighting for this for so many years that my hair's grown grey in the meantime. So yes, I really do welcome this, and I wanted to say thank you to Frank Wright and his team. They've done a really good job.
Thank you. And could we say thank you for taking the trouble to come and say thank you? Because I'm sure the officers appreciated that, and I'm sure you'll report it back to the team. So, well.
Can I just say I'm the first one to moan if there's something to moan about, but if something's done right, I'm there to say it's done right.
Right, committee questions. I suspect we won't achieve the target of finishing by 9:30, but it would be nice to finish by 10. So, you know, keep your focus, but questions, please. Yes, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question, more of a sort of a question come statement. I did comment on the consult on part of your report, and I think it's an excellent report. Just one part, if I can read it out, then obviously it'd be a lot easier than just rabbling on, really. With the spread of some nasty new diseases like ash dieback and sudden oak death, which can affect chestnut and beech, and is transmitted through the air and the water courses, so it's not helped by a high water table, it's important that we respond quickly. Recent draft documents have mentioned the need for community involvement, and in particular the important work that the tree wardens do in monitoring. There appears to have been a change in the wording from the previous draft, and the emphasis has shifted from the borough-wide to council-owned. Will the valuable information gained from tree wardens, parish councils and conservation groups be included in the appraisals? The first draft, we said we'll undertake treescape appraisals which will help to understand the composition of trees regardless of the ownership of the land. I noted in the tree strategy action plan in this agenda, action point 9, engaging and informing, that it says in years 3, 4 and 5 that we aim to develop and maintain an online resource for engagement. We have the ability for tree wardens, etc., to report a problem whoever owns the land. I'm just trying to highlight the importance of this information and hope that we'll be using it. That's it. Thank you.
I'll have an answer to that, please, when you get a chance to.
You're quite right, that action point was removed because it's elsewhere. I wanted this strategy really to focus on the revenue budget of £470,000 and how we're going to sort of tackle council-owned trees, our trees that are causing nuisance. However, the use of the tree wardens to provide these treescape appraisals, I think is very important. We've got that in the green infrastructure, and yes, that can be published online or however we see fit.
Sorry, again, does that
say no? You ask your supplement.
So yeah, just mainly to answer the question is, you know, if a member of the public or private landowner sees a problem, especially things like, you know, with the sudden oak death, it's quite sudden, it can spread. Will there be ability in that online situation to be able to report that, even if it's not on council-owned land, because obviously it spreads, you know. It can spread quite quickly. I mean, I've reported 3 chestnuts that I saw in the summer, which have now been looked at by Hampshire, and that was in Rushmore, so it's not that far away.
I think possibly through liaison with the tree wardens, identifying it, if it's coming up time and time again, it will be picked up in a treescape appraisal. I think more importantly, those sorts of issues, particularly with ash dieback, for example, or oak processionary moth, that they're being directed to the Forestry Commission, who are sort of leading on the research fields there.
Thank you. Just in a way, following up on that, this is paragraph 5.2, in terms of accessing databases and so on. What you're referring to here, I think, is an internal database that is used by yourself and fellow officers. Am I right in saying that's not even readily accessible to members, or is it via Sinbad in some way? Because it seems to me you've got a database that would be useful. It might not be public ready, but hopefully it could be a tool for councillors.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of information on our database about council entries. I would need to speak to other areas of the council because sometimes there's sort of land ownership issues that we need to be very clear about what, if we're making data available to the public, what that data is and in what format. But yeah, we do have a wealth of information, and that is what we will be querying, scrutinising, in order to inform how we go about removing these nuisance trees.
As I say, this was, if it's just initially for the use of members, then there shouldn't be that sort of public confidentiality issue, if there are any. I mean, I have to say, on the whole, I think we are far too laggardly in terms of providing information. About 15 years ago, Marilyn was probably around, if it was 15, perhaps it was 10, we had a demonstration in this very room of a database that could be provided where members of the public could log in, see whose land was which, whose lamppost was owned by, who owned which particular lamppost, and all that data, and that was in the public domain, and other local authorities were using that. And here we are, a long time later, and we've still not got to that. And I really do think we do need to make this stuff public, because it's not just sort of spreading information around for no use. It benefits us because it saves us a lot of time by people feeding back useful information that otherwise might take a lot of time to get.
I understand what you're saying. I think there's almost a corporate issue this is sounding like, though, as a wider council, to make sure that the information that we're passing over is accurate and relevant. What I am very keen on doing is sort of engaging with the community support officers to forge those links between the tree team, our tree surgeons, through the officers, through tree wardens, through down to the residents, to let them know when we'll be working in different areas and the work that will be undertaken. So if someone sees a tree surgeon in a tree outside their house, or suddenly they go home and the tree's been felled for I'm sure very good reason, that they were aware of that, or they at least have access to be able to make themselves aware of that.
I'll try and come back to that when we sum up. We're still on questions. Councillor Miller.
I'd just like to follow up on that last one, because Councillor Berman and myself are both on a parish council as well. And parish councils are the lowest level of government in this country. And often we get on the planning committee that we both rest on these applications for trees. Trying to get the accurate information for us to make any kind of judgment at the parish level to advise our residents is very difficult. And I'll certainly back up what Councillor Berman has said. To have access to that database, to the lowest, we're the lowest tier of government, local government, would be a very useful thing to have, to that access. Now, we have to comply with all the protocols for accessing data from the borough, as the borough has to. We have officers as well. So I would like to reinforce what he said, and it should be available down to the parishes, because the parishes here, as Councillor Mrs. Franklin said, it is not only in town, it's also in a very large area of this borough outside of the town. We mustn't forget that. On the last conversation, there's 160,000 people in this borough, and 100,000 of them live in the town itself. The rest live out in the country.
Thank you. I think there wasn't a question there, but it's a good point.
The question was, request that it gets down to the parishes at the very least.
We'll put any more questions? Okay. I mean, any points on the draft strategy? Anything we want to say to the cabinet member before she makes a decision? We support it. Yes? Good. And that was an easy one. So could you just feed back in? I think you're right that the question of sharing data may be a wider issue than just the trees, but if you could just undertake to feed back the comments from the committee about making it available to councillors at least, and parish councils if possible, and just get us a note, an email around the committee. We don't need a report back at a meeting, but thank you very much. To the penultimate item for tonight, which is open spaces, whatever exact order the word is, parks, open spaces and playing fields, the referral of the motion from full council. Councillor Gavin James is waiting to speak to the committee. We have a new officer getting into position, but I am going to disappear because, as I said at the beginning, I was in the cabinet meeting that made the recommendation to full council, which has been referred back to this committee, so I think I have a special interest and should not participate. But please, Martin will take over, but please allow a bit of time to discuss the work programme at the end, and please ask me back in, okay?
Right, well, I've never operated this timer, but if Councillor James would care to come forward, you did wish to speak, did you not? Well, you come and sit here and you're part of it. Come on, join in. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Just briefly introduce it. So this paper arises, so initially this all arises from a motion that was put forward to a council meeting back in March 2013. The motion is set out in the paper, but it's to request that the Cabinet ensure that the council-owned long-established parks and open spaces are protected. So that went through around 3 committees and a criteria was agreed, and then that was sent to full council. But at full council, some amendments were requested, which were then deferred back to this committee. Those amendments are set out in this paper, which have been commented on by the officer. So what we're asking you to do at this committee is comment on the officer's responses made to the points raised at the amendment at full council, and then note that those comments will be included in the report to Cabinet seeking approval for the way forward, which will then make its way back to full council.
There may be questions. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman or Vice Chairman. I've really come tonight because one of the amendments moved in full council back in June was moved by myself. I think it's pretty much dealt with in 4.3 on page 9 of 78. And that was to just change a simple word from no to even. Essentially, and I think you probably need to turn to the appendix where it goes through the decision-making criteria and whether land qualifies for protection. I don't have any great issue with numbers 1 to 9 in that criteria, which I can't now find. I think it's Appendix B, which is page 12 of however many it is. Numbers 1 to 9 are okay, but we have this number 10 exceptions criteria. Green spaces would not be afforded protection where an earlier council decision has already been made to either develop a site or investigate the potential of a site, or where a previous decision has been taken that access across that site may be required in future. It seems a bit of a wishy-washy motion. It's a bit like cheap orange juice. The motion started really, really well. It's gone through the process of officers, committees and the Cabinet, and it's been concentrated and then watered down considerably. And that number 10 frightens me a little bit. If we're saying, as we did when the motion was passed with cross-party support, the green open spaces are really important, they really matter, and we're passionate about protecting them, then that was the decision of council. The fact that decisions have been made before shouldn't really matter. If they're important, they're important. You can't have a policy that says green open spaces are really important unless they're not, because that seems very poor policy making. Obviously, I have a particular interest in one open site, green public open space. It's our original green open space at Old Common. It's been in public for the public to use and share for 700 years. Many years ago, you would have put your cattle on there, and Basingstoke even had cowboys to look after your cattle, so you could get on with work. Of course, the council still do have a different kind of cowboy, and if you want to see them, I suggest the next Cabinet meeting is a good time to see them meet. They made a decision in 2012 to explore whether or not they could reach an agreement with Basingstoke Town Football Club about relocating on that open space. I was assured that was without prejudice, no decision had been made. In fact, the evidence of that you just heard earlier, because in September of the same year, a paper came to this committee's predecessor talking about the same site being a graveyard. And obviously, I don't think anyone needs me to explain how the difficulties are of having a graveyard on a playing area of a 5,000 capacity stadium, but it's very flawed. So we had an open mind of what to do with Old Common. Leaving it would be a good option, and I protested. When we got to 2014, the same cabinet or different cabinet said we're going to press ahead with the negotiations. We scrutinised that, challenging that, and the portfolio holder said, I don't know why we're here in scrutiny today, this decision was made in 2012. So when is a decision made? When is a council decision made? It's a very sort of wishy-washy thing. So that statement in itself is a problem. If we're really honest with each other, put our hands on our heart, do we know every piece of green open space in our ward that we think this policy would protect? And can we be absolutely certain that there isn't an agreement, a portfolio holder delegated decision, some sort of planning document sitting somewhere that says, no, that decision was made? Back in 2004, someone made a decision, therefore the site is accepted. The interesting thing is the officer's response is, and it's in 4.3.2, the proposed wording change would mean these decisions would be subject to review by full council. It says it as if that's an awful thing, that these important decisions should not be entrusted to a group of councillors. Unfortunately for the officer who wrote the report, important decisions should be taken by the councillors, and it should be taken in full council. I think we can be trusted with taking difficult decisions and having sensible debates. So we're kind of being neutered by the reason why we can't do the change that I wanted. So I'd ask committee tonight to look at the amendment, as I say, outlined, I think it's in 4.3 and 3.4, little bullet point 3 on page 7 of 78 explains the amendment so that all open space is protected regardless of previous decisions. And then if we need to discuss those in full council, we can. And we can make decisions. Wouldn't that be nice?
Thank you, Councillor James. You were almost kept to time. Great. Right. In the past, we've had the opportunity to ask questions of a speaker, but we won't tonight because it doesn't seem to have been the form tonight. So I'll move straight into questions from the members and give the officer a chance to summarise when he's had a collection beyond Councillor James's contribution. So any questions? Councillor Marks.
Just for clarification, please, to get it clear in my mind. If what the speaker's just said, we stopped doing number 10, does that mean that any of the previous cemetery sites would be completely ruled out because all green space would be protected?
You might as well go straight into answer, Mr. Wareham.
If we choose to apply criteria, I think the simple answer is yes, essentially. It would mean that the open spaces such as the one in Homestead Road, for example, that was discussed earlier, we would seek to apply whatever criteria was approved to that site, and that may or may not give it a level of protection. So yes, potentially they could all be protected in some way.
If we agreed this, we're therefore then...
Sorry, let me interrupt. Which this do you mean? Because there are so many thises.
Sorry, number 10. If we overturn number 10, we would effectively be overturning a previous decision this committee had made tonight.
No, because we've only just started and there's a new committee on it, so...
Sorry, if I can just clarify that. Obviously, no previous decision has been made to reserve a site for cemetery use. We've looked at those sites for cemetery use, but we haven't made a decision as a council, best of my knowledge at least, that we will use a particular site such as Homestead Road as a cemetery. What we have done as a council is made decisions, say for example in relation to Old Common, that we would explore providing a football stadium there. And what obviously exception criteria number 10 seeks or looks to is to say we should not apply this criteria where we've already made a previous decision. We should only apply it to sites where we haven't made a previous decision on that land.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll throw it open for debate. Right, no debate. That's doing well. Oh, sorry, Councillor Tucker.
Sorry, I hate silence. I actually think these proposed criteria is is acceptable. As I read it, I thought it all makes sense beautifully as I went down it, and I can see nothing wrong with it whatsoever. So I'm very happy with it.
As I see it, I agree, they're very simple, and I have to congratulate the officer in doing it a way I could understand. So you eliminate one, and then you go down to the next. The only sticking point is 10, and what we do with land that has previously had some sort of decision attached to it. And that could, of course, be quite recent, but it could go back quite a few years. And there's certainly been mentioned by Councillor James, there might be some uncertainty about it existing until some oldie comes along and says, but I remember, and happens to put that in. So unless there's a definitive list that shows all decisions on all public open space, we do have a bit of a problem there.
Chair, if I can just offer hopefully some clarity, and again, I'm talking from sort of the best of my knowledge. The only areas of open space, to my knowledge, where we've made a previous decision, there are only two, as far as I'm aware. One is Old Common, where we've agreed to explore that stadium option, and the other is what I know as Daniel Park QE2 Field in Whitchurch, where we've agreed to reserve an area for some development which may or may not happen at some point in future. And that's the only two sites that I'm aware of where this council has made previous decisions about open space. I'll stand corrected if I am, but that's the best of my knowledge, that's the only two decisions that are outstanding.
It seems to me that, I'm sure, because you've been around a long time, you know most of what's been happening here, and it's likely that does encompass them all, but not totally reliable. And that's the difficulty we've got. Councillor Miller.
It's certainly a question. Something's just occurred to me, and it applies to quite a bit of land around Basingstoke. What about covenants?
Quite clearly, any land we have will have covenants, and should we make a decision at some point to use a piece of land, there will inevitably be covenants on that piece of land which we will need to extract ourselves from. That may prevent something happening to that piece of land because we may not be able to extract ourselves from those covenants. So there is that fallback, but of course every piece of land will have its own covenants depending on its transfer to the council. So yes, covenants potentially could be a sticking point at some point in future should we ever wish to use a piece of land that wasn't protected in any way.
Again, presumably there's a mechanism for checking that covenants are covered as part of the process in putting forward any scheme. So far, a portfolio holder, do you wish to... right, can I then ask, because we are putting our views forward to the portfolio holder, and really we come down to, I'm taking it from the nods and signs that everybody's happy with 1 to 9. So we just have the issue of whether, in effect, any land that's not covered by the other criteria, if there's intended change of use, would go to full council, and that's the issue of whether full council ultimately has the say on it. And I need a view. So can somebody give me a view, or if there's an absence of view, I'll put one, but I prefer it came from the members.
I support this officer's paper, and I support what's in here, because we should employ, and we do employ, professional officers. If we're going to neuter them and get them to try and do a deal, but the deal's conditional on this and conditional on this, I see our officers being neutered and becoming less able to do a sensible job. Just recently, there's quite a few large areas gone, redevelopment, regeneration. So they have to be able, you can tie the hands behind the back. We do regularly. That's what we as councillors are supposed to do, but not all the time, and not neutering them like this.
So, trying to cut to the chase, I take it that in effect, you're not supporting taking paragraph 4.3, you're not supporting the amendment from the word not to even. You are not supporting that change.
trying to work through the mire, which I know there's been so many changes, you get a headache in the end
Correct.
trying to follow them. Right, okay. Is that a motion there, or is that a proposal? It sounds like it.
If it helps to move the evening on, I'll propose it, yes.
And is somebody going to second that? Well, if you don't want it as a formal motion, the council has put forward a view. I appreciate we're not making the decision, but we're trying to give you a clear steer. We'd like to think so. Is there a counter view, or is there a consensus around that we don't wish to follow what Councillor James has requested of us and merely allow officer decision where there have been previous council resolutions or whatever?
Well, I can't see a problem with the amendment. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to bring it to full council. I mean, we've already been told this evening that it currently is likely to only affect 2 known sites. Obviously, we'd need to have a more current list. But if it's going to be only that numbers, why does it matter? You know, I think maybe it should come to full council. I mean, it's likely that it would come to full council anyway if there's going to be development on those 2 sites.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just support what Councillor Washbourne said, but I just want to bring the committee's attention to the fact that there are 4 amendments put forward which are outlined in section 4, where we're asked to consider the proposal that was put at 4.1, the proposal that was put at 4.2, 4.3 and 4.4. I'm just concerned that we're going to miss those ones and just focus on 4.3.
You're quite right. I got carried away with the discussion that went before, but Sinclair Drive, there's been a declaration of non-pecuniary interest, but yes, yeah, and but no comments from other members, and this is the opportunity. I'm going to just stick with the question of the not or even options, which is 4.3.1. I'm not getting a clear steer from the members on this. I'm getting the feeling that there's a certain, not quite ambivalence. I think there's a feeling reasonably strongly in it going to full council, and reasonably strongly the other way not to. And I think that seems to be evenly balanced. Is somebody going to, you know, without having a vote? That's all I can say from the chair. So that's how I see it. I'm happy to be challenged on that assessment. Right. Okay. So, Councillor Cousins, yes.
If we're saying that there is a potential split between not and even, then I know it draws out the meeting, but if we're split on that, then we might as well have a quick vote. I'm sure we can do that quickly to see whether we prefer the word not or prefer the word even. I personally prefer the word even because we are trusted as councillors to make a decision. Officers will write their reports, which puts their recommendations. It is then up to councillors to make their judgment on that.
Councillor Miller.
The way that Councillor Cousins has just explained that, I've got no problem with it. It's, you know, it puts it in the right place. It's councillors. Yeah, simple as that. I'm happy with the amendment.
Right. Okay. Just one moment, please. I think now, unless you wish to suggest that we have a vote, I don't want to discuss a long time whether they have a vote or not. I am being urged not to formalise it with a vote. I know the portfolio holders here, and she can assess the feeling. The balance has been shifted slightly in another direction, and for what it's worth, I share that view. So, since I haven't expressed opinions, that might have the slight majority, I think, here tonight, that one does replace the word not with even. So moving on then to the next, or is it moving back, is it? Well, okay. Delete the line referring to Parkview play area, and even before that, wow. I was parachuted in a bit, so.
4.1. Right. Oops. Does anybody wish to comment on 4.1? Okay, Councillor Tucker doesn't agree with it. Do you have anything more profound than that? Councillor Cousins, bless you.
Thank you, Chair. 4.1, the officer sort of makes the fact that if we do it, then there's no point in having a list anyway, because it kind of wipes out the integrity of the motion, which is we would like a list of protected sites. I can understand why the amendment was put forward, but I don't necessarily agree with it because the whole point is we want the names of those sites that are afforded protection. I think 4.1 wipes that out automatically and says, look, this is what anything that's under section 106 is included, which could be anything and everything. So I'm not sure I'm in agreement with 4.1.
We are a new committee, so we're obviously not bound by what other committees have said. I have to say, in having attended previous meetings of similar committees performing a similar role, the thrust that there be that be the case was definitely there. But whether we would wish to maintain it so far, Councillor Tucker, did you wish to contribute? You said you'd like to speak.
No, I just said that it's nice that both of us agree.
You spoke. Any other comments? Portfolio holder, you have.
No, I'm pleased that we can agree. I agree that, yeah, it's good.
Okay, so we can now move on to the next page on 4.2, Park View. Our beloved Park View. I rather expected Councillor Watts to be here. You did send an email, whether Councillor Golding's got that. Would somebody mind asking Councillor Watts whether, Councillor Golding whether he has one, please? What are you going to bring? We shall bring it forth from the ether. I don't remember seeing it myself, I have to say, but that might just be my incompetence. Yes, well, I don't want to leave Councillor Mill out. That would be unfair. No.
Can I just, sorry
on
to
public
interrupt.
duty. Right, and I'm thinking it's about to appear now through the ether.
Where's his papers? Got a plastic folder of papers.
Oh, well, I mean, we've got it here now, Paul, so it's all right.
Oh, you've
So,
got
yeah.
it, fine.
Well, we've got it electronically, if I can. Blimey.
Essentially, he understood that.
Chair, would you like me to provide you a brief summary of what Councillor Watts' comments are? Would that be helpful for you? Because I have had them emailed a day or two.
I would be very
Okay.
grateful because the writing's so small on this that I might damage my sight.
Councillor Watts raised 2 points, one in relation to 4.1 and one in relation to 4.2. We're dealing with 4.2, so I'll answer that now, if I may.
We're dealing with 4.2, yes.
4.2.
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
He essentially was supporting what officers were saying. Parkview space has yet to come into council's ownership, and what Councillor Watts would suggest is because of that, it shouldn't be on the list at this moment in time, and officers advocate that and support that, and therefore we equally believe it shouldn't be on the list. And we proposed it's taken off. So Councillor Watts was supporting what officers would do and was suggesting that you as a committee would like to support that particular point. Okay, so that was 4.2. On 4.1, Councillor Watts was referred back to a resolution which the council made in 2009, which, and if I just read it, it says that the council as a landowner will not promote for housing development through the SHLA process any land that was acquired for a peppercorn as open space under a Section 106 agreement. And Councillor Watts urges you in his email to support his proposed amendment. The officer view in the report clearly is that we do not agree with that way forward on the Section 106 land because it provides this blanket cover, and the intention, I think, of the original motion was to have a list, as Councillor Cousins rightly pointed out there. The intention was to have a list so members are aware of the sites which were there. Secondly, also, open spaces secured through a Section 106 agreement are relatively new spaces, generally speaking, and the original motion sought to protect, and I use the words from the motion, long established parks and open spaces. So hence that's the officer view. Further advice from our legal team suggests that we as a council cannot impose criteria which would be unreasonable or disproportionate and potentially fettered away the council's discretion or opportunity, are the words I think it means. In other words, what they're saying is we cannot introduce a policy which says we will never make this space available for anything. And that's essentially what the 106 proposal from Councillor Watts potentially could do, and it could potentially expose the council to challenge. So although Councillor Watts says he would urge you to support it, the officer view is you shouldn't support it, and that's what's reflected in the report before you.
Councillor Cousins.
Just to clarify, could a new site eventually be added to the list of protected sites using the criteria that we're looking at? That's just what I'm going to make sure in my head.
If the council adopted the criteria which was originally proposed and went originally to cabinet and full council, if we adopted that subsequently and a new site came forward and it met that criteria, whatever that criteria was, yes, it would be protected.
So in view of Councillor Watts's contribution from afar, I don't think I'm getting the message we're not seeking to change 4.1 anyway. 4.2, we haven't yet struck a view, but no, sorry, following the contribution which was specifically from the ward member. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're in agreement, sorry. Was that what you're trying to clarify, Mr. Wareham?
I was just going to repeat what I said. Councillor Watts suggested it should be excluded. Officers suggested it should be excluded.
Right. Marvellous. It doesn't seem real somehow. And then so we now need to do 4.4. Sinclair Drive. What a surprise.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. It has been rightly pointed out that we are somewhat past our 9:30 finishing time.
This will not take long.
No, I nonetheless need to have the movement of suspension of standing orders for us to continue.
They don't exist.
They don't exist.
Not in committee work.
We're just saying, look at the time, let's get done by 10.
Oh, right, okay, well,
We can do.
Yeah, we can.
in that case,
We've got 15 minutes, let's go.
no, we still have another item after this, so not to forget.
Yeah, we know.
So we aim, I don't know what that difference that makes, we aim to finish at 10. Yes, agreed? Yes, okay. I'm sorry to interrupt your flow.
This was an amendment which I brought before council in June. It's not owned by the council yet, but even though it's probably imminent, if the amendment of 106 had come into play, or if it ever did come into play, Sinclair Drive would have been protected automatically. I've had a long conversation with Richard Wareham, and
he's assured me that if this criteria is adopted, he will sit down with Councillor Cousins and I, and we would look at Sinclair Drive with that criteria. But if we could have that noted in the minutes, please.
That is, of course, a specific to Sinclair Drive. So
it is really because I raised it specifically because it came about because there was a chart on a list on the full council agenda which had a list of places that would the criteria, certain areas that have already met the criteria or hadn't met the criteria. Sinclair Drive, even though it wasn't in the council's ownership, actually stated it would not meet it or had not met it, and it's not even owned by the council yet. So I suppose really hindsight probably shouldn't have been on there, but we're quite happy with discussions I've had with Richard Wareham. So
one could say something about minded to when it is owned or something like that. I mean, clearly we can't apply it when it isn't owned, but one could say one is minded to in the expectation that it is owned by the council, and then it gives us a bit of a basis for doing it.
Okay.
I don't know, the portfolio holder is deciding probably that I've not used the right legal language or something like that, but yeah, sure.
Again, it goes back to the point which Councillor Cousins just asked the question there a moment ago. Would a new site have the criteria applied to it, and would it be considered? So yes, if a new site was adopted by the council, we would apply this criteria to it. If it met the criteria, it goes onto the list of protection. I think where the conversation Councillor Westbrook and I have had is that does it or does it not meet the criteria? The officer's opinion is that it doesn't. The council's opinion is that it does, and I think we've agreed that we would have that conversation further down the line, and he would try and convince me that it does meet the criteria.
Okay, in summary, I think that's dealt with all the points now. Now that went backwards as well as forwards. And so just to clarify, on 4.1, we're saying we're supporting the amendment. 4.2... We're not supporting the amendment, right? Okay. I must be getting tired. 4.2, we're supporting. 4.3, we didn't get a clear steer, but with a emphasis or leaning towards the change. And on the last one, 4.4, there's going to be onward negotiation between ward members and Mr. Wareham or other officers. All agreed? Is that correct? Thank you. No dissensions. Lovely. With that, I'll pass back to our regular chair.
Okay, right, thank you. Last item, I hope, which is the work programme. Did everyone get my email? I'm sorry I only sent it this morning, but I've been trying to do that. So if I can just go through it for the record and only speak, if you disagree with anything or you want to clarify anything, yes, no, okay, speak up. So we're recommending that we add the youth strategy to the agenda for November. We'd previously agreed we want to look at it, but we were going to leave it. We hadn't fixed the date, but as it's due to go to the portfolio holder for decision in December, November is our last chance. So we'll put that on for November. Options for increasing the recycling rate. I apologise to Martin. He raised it in our discussion downstairs, and then I forgot to mention it in my summing up. Sorry, the options for increasing the recycling rate, I think we did touch, and then we thought we'd leave that to scrutiny, but the portfolio holder is very keen to bring some proposals forward, and it's not on scrutiny's timetable programme, so we will take the opportunities. It is a forward-looking thing of also putting that on the agenda for November. Okay, spending the Environmental Investment Fund is the one I need to apologise to Martin, which we did discuss downstairs. We did think we'd do, and then I forgot to mention it. So I think...
I forgot to remind you.
And you forgot to remind me. That is true. But I think it would be good to timetable that for January. We should confirm that the review of the outcomes and options of COG 3, the access project, should be on the January agenda, unless we need to slip it in the light of what we were told tonight, that the COG's timetable should slip, but for the moment, we should keep it on. We should change estate management to neighbourhood management, just because estate management had two different possible misinterpretations, and the Labour group's proposals anyway proposed neighbourhood managers, so calling it neighbourhood management seems like a good idea if everyone's happy with that. As I've commented here, although paper F shows Basingstoke Live as a separate item for October, we'd actually asked for it as part of the proposals from COG 1. But I suppose if COG 1 doesn't have any proposals about Basingstoke Live, it can't be part of their proposals. So it may need to be a separate paper, in which case, please, will you put Basingstoke Live on before we discuss COG 1, so that we actually know what the problem is before we start talking about the solutions. Jack, Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I know at the moment it is called Basingstoke Live, but please could it be called Basingstoke Live and Basingstoke Festival? They're two very different and separate things.
Yes, did we ask for a report on both? Yes. Okay, yes, I'm told that we did ask for both, that's fine. So I'm just thinking that, you know, it might be a bit late to ask for one we hadn't already asked for. Right, we'll ask them both, and officers, please put them as the item immediately before the COG one, please. Yeah. And finally, the list of things to be allocated in Appendix F included fair trade, which I had sort of mooted as a possible item before we had our discussion, but so many other useful things came forward that I never proposed it. So we might come back to it one day, but I think for the moment it shouldn't be featuring in our work programme, even in the unscheduled bit. Okay, so I've got one, if that's all right, then we've had the scoping templates. Sorry, yes, Councillor Cousins?
Sorry, Chair, just one proposal. The smoking near children's play areas, I'm quite keen to get that timetabled, and as January is looking a little bit light, could I suggest that we try and look at that for January, please?
Can I ask that you then ask that when I've said what I'm about to say, we come back to that? That's all right. We've had the scoping templates. Thank you very much to the people who've been on those scoping groups. I think that the output is excellent. Both of them talk about inviting members of the public in. Both of them items are currently on the work programme, I think, for November. I think it would be far too ambitious with the other things that are November to consider getting the public in for both items in November. So I was going to suggest that we pick one for November and one for January. I have no feeling for which, I mean, I'm not trying to steer you to doing either of them, except that if you want a recommendation, I thought it might be easier to get the relevant people for sport together in time for November than the relevant people for neighbourhood management, but I'm entirely comfortable doing it the other way around if that's what you'd prefer. And then I have a commented detail on the scoping template for neighbourhood management. But do you have a preference for which order we do them in?
Thanks, Chair. The only question I might have is there's a bit of overlap with this. I think I spoke to Julie the other day between our neighbourhood one and part of, I think, something on the EPH as well, or another committee, scrutiny, sorry, where we're trying to bring in the same people, i.e. Hampshire County Council, which would probably be quite tricky. But you know, if they're going to depend on the amount of work involved in that and the officers' work and the likelihood of how quickly we can do that. But Councillor Miller and Councillor Bannon and I both agree, well, all of us agree that it's important to get them on board as early as possible and involved in what we're doing, because a lot of the input's going to have to come from them as well. Thank you.
Is that a vote for trying to do neighbourhood management in November, or a vote for saying it'll take us till January to get them all lined up? So, Councillor Miller.
We've got to ask the question to find the answers to that. We've got to start approaching, and I think that was the impetus that we were trying to get on here, is get Hampshire County Council. We need to contact them ASAP to see if they can get involved at an early time. When we get answers to those questions, we can give you much better advice about when you can timetable it.
So can I, just as a proposal then, we will we will put out soundings on neighbourhood management first to see whether we could get enough people together for November, and if we can't, get them together for January. And if we find out in time that we can't get them together for November, we will try and get the sports people together for November. Is that okay? I don't know how you'll record that in the work programme, but at least it's a clear decision. I just had one point of detail on the neighbourhood management. If there was an Overton council here, I think they would tell you they don't have a town council because they're very proud of the fact that they're a village. So I believe we only have 2 town councils, which are Tadley and Whitchurch, and I think they should be involved. But I think we should have a couple of village councils as well. And I was going to suggest that, as you've mentioned Overton, we should include Overton. And I was going to suggest we should include Dummer, who are a small and well-formed little village, but we've had their chair speaking tonight. He's also the chair of the Association of Parish and Town Councils, or Town and Parish Councils, whichever way around it is. And yes, so if you're okay, I think we will turn Overton into a village. It must be a parish council as they're a village, and add Dummer to that as well, and see whether they'd like to be involved. I know, because they do have housing association houses in Dummer, and I do know that there are issues with liaison with them sometimes, so that would probably be
How are things down in Dean? We never have Dean involved, do we?
well.
No, that was just
No. Yes. So is that? I think that's it on the. So coming back to yes, smoking. I'm now losing track.
It's young John.
Yes, I'm just. So do you want to? Should we program that in for the meeting after January, whenever that is? Which they say is March.
At the very least, I would like it timetabled. So yes, if March becomes available, yes, we will put it to March. It's just purely we want it on the agenda rather than to be timetabled, please.
Is that okay? March, fine, excellent, well done. Good. Thank you very much. We've achieved 10 o'clock. Oh, hang on. I thought.
Well, no.
Sorry. Yes. Just very briefly. Do we need the scoping groups to continue working on the detail of who gets invited and things? Is that the best? Okay. Fine. So Councillor Bierman will join neighbourhood management, which will still leave 3 people on playing fields, which presumably will be okay for those 3.
They're very dynamic.
Yes, it's Councillors Cousins and Taylor, who are the 2 who are still here. Is that okay with you guys? Okay, you can do without my vice chair. Fine, good. Okay.
With difficulty.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I declare the meeting closed at 9:59.